Chapter 656. Inside an abode located at the back garden of Great Yen Imperial Palace, an excited Lu Qingfeng was seen walking around a white jade flower pot with his hands clasped behind his back. Inside the flower pot was a blooming ink stamen begonia. The whirlwind brought up by Lu Qingfeng's fast running was ruffling the blossoms, causing the petals to fall and scatter all over the ground. Meng Xiaobai, Zhang Hu, Hu Wei, Luo Kadi, Mao Yang, and a group of Lu Qingfeng's trusted subordinates were standing off to the side. Their faces were filled with excitement, and they kept craning their necks to peek at the entrance of the abode. Meanwhile, Lu Ziyuan was sitting lazily on a large chair, his shifty eyes peeking at a few pretty palace maids standing in a corner of the abode. All of a sudden, the lights in the abode dimmed for a moment, then came back on. Amidst the whistling of the cold wind, Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu appeared in the abode, hand in hand. Lu Qingfeng and the others did not see how Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu came into the abode. They just felt that there were two more people in the abode, and after staring at Wu Qi for a long while, they finally saw the faces of Wu Qi and Princess Zhanglu. Lu Qingfeng was overjoyed. He cupped his fist at Wu Qi and said with a smile, "Lu Qingfeng, Duke of Yanlu of Great Yan, offers greetings, Your Highness, Prince of Tianyun of the Six Dynasties." Wu Qi raised his eyebrows, then spun and came behind Lu Qingfeng, thrusting his foot toward his buttocks. Lu Qingfeng let out a strange cry and sprung up into the air. But, the speed of Wu Qi's kick was just a little bit faster than his, and the tip of his foot accurately hit Lu Qingfeng's buttocks, throwing him over 30 feet away. Fortunately, Lu Qingfeng's cultivation was quite good. He gently raised his qi and a cloud burst out from under his feet, allowing him to steadily land on the ground. Rolling his eyes, Wu Qi pointed his finger at Lu Qingfeng and scolded with a smile, "If you say those 3 words again, I'll immediately turn hostile and beat you so badly that even your mother won't be able to recognize you." "TSK, Prince of Tianyun, is this thing worth it? If I didn't want to take advantage of them, I wouldn't even bother with this title." Lu Qingfeng laughed out loud. He stretched out his arms and embraced Wu Qi. The two of them hugged each other tightly. Today, Wu Qi had the cultivation base of a top-level heaven immortal, while Lu Qingfeng was still a little low-level cultivator. But, the two of them were still the same as when they first met. There was not the slightest change, and there was not the slightest unfamiliarity between them. When Meng Xiaobai and the others saw this, they all came forward with smiles on their faces. Wu Qi was still Wu Qi, the Wu Qi they knew, the Wu Qi who called them brothers. In this world, many things could change at any time, but there was a kind of brotherhood. Even if they were separated by thousands of mountains and rivers, even if time flew by, even if the gap between them grew wider and wider, a true brother would always be a brother. No matter what happened, it would never change. Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng held hands and smiled, while Princess Zhanglu quietly walked to the side and ordered the palace maids to prepare tea and snacks. Princess Zhanglu was a very clear-headed little woman. Even though everyone else in this abode was her subject, she knew that these people were Wu Qi's brothers, her husband's brothers. Therefore, she seriously and quietly acted as an inconspicuous housewife, preparing everything they needed. In addition to tea and snacks, Princess Zhanglu also ordered people to prepare wine and delicacies, and even ordered the imperial kitchen to quickly prepare dishes such as roasted lamb and other dishes to go with wine. Judging from the posture of Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng, they were also going to drink wine and talk about their feelings after parting. As the abode was too small, it was not enough to satisfy their craving. Therefore, Wu Qi and his company came to the back garden, picked a pine forest that was right next to the lake, and built a bonfire, roasting whole sheep, cows, chickens, ducks, geese, rabbits, and many other delicacies that went well with wine. The group of people sat on the ground, with a bright moon hanging over their heads, surrounded by a picturesque scenery. A gentle breeze blew past them, and they were talking and laughing happily, telling each and every interesting story. Ao Buzan, whose body had grown to the size of a bowl, was lying sprawled on the grass by the lakeside. Wu Qi used the back of his head as a pillow for Ao Buzan. Ao Buzan kept grumbling as he held a roasted lamb leg with both hands, munching on it until his face was smeared with oil. Staring at the stars in the sky, Wu Qi slowly told them everything that had happened when he left Myriad Immortals' planet for Panga continent. Yu Huan came to him to seek revenge for the murder of his brother, but in the end, he was captured alive by Wu Qi and brought to Panga continent as a hostage. After that, Yu Zong spent all his wealth to beg the Yu clan of Zhong province to save his son and capture Wu Qi alive to vent his anger. In the end, Wu Qi attracted the thunder punishment of the heavenly tribulation and killed all the soldiers hiding in ambush. But then, Yu Zong struck out suddenly and nearly killed Wu Qi with a palm strike. After that, Beiji's predecessor saved Wu Qi, and the master and disciple took Wu Qi in out of kindness. However, they bumped into Lao Ai and Madman Shui, who were severely wounded, in that tiny temple. Perhaps this was the ill-fated fate between them and Wu Qi. Who would have thought that they would bump into some overlords who wanted to invade the Deep Valley by force? In the end, Wu Qi and Lao Ai invaded Anhe City and took over the power of Euphoria Heavenly Palace. After a painstaking effort and risking his life, Wu Qi finally found the innate yang energy under the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean and successfully formed his Dharma body. At the same time, he plotted against King Zhang Qiu and Patriarch Miaoying. But in the end, Feng Lingling, the prefecture overseer of Zhong province, nearly had his entire clan slaughtered. Wu Qi also told Lu Qingfeng and others about what he saw with his own eyes, how Feng Lingling, his clan, and all his subordinates were captured by a giant hand out of the void. 2 heads were better than 1. Perhaps, Lu Qingfeng and the others could figure out something that Wu Qi had never thought of. After that, Bo Zhongfu, the new prefecture overseer of Zhong province, was appointed as the new prefecture overseer of Zhong province. Yu clan of Zhong province had reaped a great reward for betraying Feng Lingling, and the number of territories in 30 provinces had stunned Lu Qingfeng and the others. They could never imagine how vast the 30 provinces under the rule of Great Yu dynasty were. When they heard that Wu Qi had helped Yu Mu gain the power of Hai province, and that he had acquired a large fief, the East Sea County, on which he had built a city and begun to train a private army, Lu Qingfeng and others burst into cheers, clapping and stamping their feet. The East Sea County alone was a few times larger than the territory of Great Yen on Myriad Immortals planet plus all the vassal kingdoms. Such a vast territory was indeed promising. After a long time and finishing 3 jars of fine wine, Wu Qi told them what he had experienced in the past few years. After that, Lu Qingfeng began to tell them what had happened to them. Compared with Wu Qi's magnificent and even perilous experience, the experience of Lu Qingfeng and others was really nothing to write home about. They had followed Great Yen out of Myriad Immortals planet and found a new planet to settle down on. First, they eradicated the native powers on this planet, and then began to build Great Yan's own foundation. As a member of Great Yen Imperial clan, Lu Qingfeng was one of the very few who had gone through many trials and tribulations. No matter it was wisdom or talent, he was one of the best. Therefore, not only did he inherit the official position of West Supervisor of Duke Yen Lu, he was now also assigned to the military affairs, and played an important role in training the new army of Great Yen dynasty. Although Lu Ziyuan, who was once a foppish young master, still behaved a little dissolute, under Lu Qingfeng's discipline, he had become an increasingly important member of Great Yen's government, just like how he helped Wu Qi manage Star-Picking City in those years. Great Yen had deliberately chosen such a planet to settle down, and the native powers on this planet were extremely weak, so they did not pose any threat to Great Yen. As for the rest of the government affairs, they were handled by elite soldiers and strong generals. Therefore, Lu Qingfeng did not have much to tell Wu Qi. The only thing worth mentioning was that Meng Xiaobai, Luo Kadi, Mao Yang, Hu Wei, and Zhang who were now the generals of the 1st Battalion of the new army. The battalion consisted of more than 15,000 soldiers, and like Qin Qingshui and others, they were now the generals of the new generation of Great Yen. Under the moonlight, the group of hot-blooded men was talking, laughing, crying, and making noise. For a moment, Wu Qi and Lu Qingfeng were talking about Myriad Immortals planet, which was ruined by Patriarch Yuan Hua. Apart from cursing, they also lamented the countless people of Great Yen who had died tragically on Myriad Immortals planet. At the same time, they were glad that all the members of Great Yan's imperial clan and powerful clans had evacuated Myriad Immortal's planet. Otherwise, the loss alone would be enough to make Great Yan suffer a great deal of pain. When it came to anger, Wu Qi threw his fist into the air and shattered a few boulders by the lake. When it came to happiness, Lu Qingfeng jumped up and waved his hands, throwing his head back and roaring joyfully. Then, the crowd raised their wine jars, cheered, and drank to their heart's content. The joy they felt was indescribable with words. They fooled around for a long time, and when the first ray of dawn appeared on the horizon, Wu Qi suddenly sprung up to his feet. Solemnly, he bowed deeply at Lu Qingfeng and said, "Elder brother, I have something to ask of you." Lu Qingfeng returned the bow with a solemn face and said, "You are my brother. Everything is negotiable." Wu Qi straightened up and said with a smile, "When the people of the 6 dynasties go to Panga continent, I will not allow anyone to meddle in my little territory. At that time, even Yan Bugue's scouting office will have to get out of here and do what they are supposed to do. I will not let them meddle in my territory." Holding Lu Qingfeng's hand, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "I want you to help me, elder brother. No matter how the East Sea County develops, it will always be shared by us brothers." Lu Qingfeng smiled lightly and held Wu Qi's hand tightly. "We are brothers, so there is no need to be so courteous. The East Sea County is our foundation, and naturally, it will be us brothers who will work together to take care of it. Ha ha ha, perhaps in the future, we will be independent of the 6 dynasties." Wu Qi chuckled. With a wave of his hand, he produced a large number of storage bags that were stuffed to the brim, and distributed them to Lu Qingfeng and the others. There were all kinds of natural treasures for cultivation in the storage bags, as well as cultivation manuals that Wu Qi had carefully selected for Lu Qingfeng and the others, which were more than enough for them to cultivate to the peak of Heaven Immortal Realm. Lu Qingfeng and the others did not stand on ceremony. They gladly accepted the storage bags and focused on following Wu Qi to Panga continent. Just then, Ma Yi strode over to them with a few eunuchs. "Prince Tianyun, the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties have come to an agreement. 7 days from now will be the auspicious day, and all 6 dynasties will go to Panga continent together." Chapter 657. Outside Ji City, the emperors, courtiers, generals, and soldiers of the 6 dynasties, as well as the carefully selected people who were extremely loyal to the 6 dynasties, were standing in countless phalanxes of 10,000 people around Chi-Chi. The total population of the 6 dynasties had exceeded 1 billion. Apart from leaving some members of the imperial clan and generals to guard the territories in outer heavenly realms and slowly develop their national strength, the elites of the 6 dynasties were gathered here, preparing for the expedition to Pangu. 1 billion people were gathered on the plain outside Ji City. It would have been impossible for the 6 dynasties to do this if not for the large number of heaven immortals guarding them today. When the number of people reached 10,000, there was no end to it, but when the number reached 100 million, it was impossible to imagine what a terrible scene it would be when 100 million people lined up on the plain. And here, there were 1 billion people. If the cultivators of the 6 dynasties had not been flying at low altitudes and soothing the people with all kinds of unique spells, the 1 billion people would have fallen into chaos. Even so, when 1 billion people were gathered together, the plain was densely packed with human heads. When they inhaled at the same time, a gust of wind would sweep across the plain, and when they exhaled at the same time, the clouds in the sky would be dispersed by the airflow. As long as they casually stomped their feet, the ground would tremble and dust would fly up into the sky. On the dais, the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties stood in a row behind Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu. They looked at Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu with complicated looks in their eyes, curious to see how they were going to transport 1 billion people to Pangu continent. The cost of traveling from outer heavenly realms to Pangu continent through a teleportation formation was astronomical. If all 1 billion people were to travel to Pangu continent by normal means, the huge cost would bankrupt the 6 dynasties 10,000 times over. Wu Qi looked at Princess Xianglu with a smile. His interstitial world was a mass of chaos. Although he could create mountains and hills at his will, it would cost him a lot of energy and mental strength to control them. Princess Zhongli's interstitial world, on the other hand, was a vast expanse of fertile land, enough to accommodate the people in front of him for a short period of time. With a faint smile on her face, Princess Zhongli slowly raised her hands. Streams of five-colored divine light flowed out from between her fingers, and the thin curtain of light transformed into an arched gate in front of her. Inside the gate, which was 1,000 feet in both width and length, there were vaguely mountains and rivers, the sun and the moon, flowers and trees, and a boundless beautiful scenery. There was also a dense natural energy spreading out from the gate. The cool and refreshing natural energy sprinkled on the emperors and ministers of the 6 states, making them take a deep breath. Ying Zheng and the others stared at the arched door in horror. Just the natural energy emanating from Princess Zhongli's interstitial world was a few times stronger than that on Myriad Immortals' planet. It was hard to imagine to what extent the natural energy in this interstitial world had reached. In and, the people of Zhonglu and courtiers, as, were. And were, who were, and, of as, and were as, and kur, as, and as, yang as, and as, planets, and as, as. A 5-colored light poured out of the arched door and quickly enveloped the hundreds of phalanxes of 10,000 soldiers. Then, with a flash of light, the phalanxes disappeared. Sheets of light kept pouring out of the arched door, and countless people on the plain disappeared amidst them. In just a quarter of an hour, all 1 billion people and over 10 million soldiers of the 6 dynasties had been sucked into Princess Zhongli's interstitial world. A soft voice rang out in Princess Zhongli's interstitial world. The ancient melody had an indescribable, magical charm, and those who were sucked into the interstitial world felt as if they had returned to their childhood, as if their grandmother was singing a lullaby softly in their ears. In the midst of the natural energy, which was so rich that it almost condensed into liquid, 1 billion soldiers closed their eyes and fell asleep peacefully. The natural energy slowly seeped into the bodies of these soldiers, slowly changing their physiques and aptitudes. Even with the help of Princess Zhongli's almighty divine ability, it would take months to return to Pangu continent from outer heavenly realms. During these months, Princess Zhongli had controlled the interstitial world to improve the postures of these people. When they arrived in the interstitial world, their physiques and aptitudes would be greatly improved. At the very least, the nearly 20 million soldiers of the 6 dynasties would be able to cultivate the cultivation techniques of the human race much faster. Of course, this kind of adjustment was also targeted. If the soldiers of Great Yen could get 100 benefits, then the soldiers of the other 5 dynasties could only get 10 benefits at most. Princess Zhongli knew this very well. She had never been a good person. If it had not been for the alliance between the 6 dynasties, in which Wu Qi had cheated the 5 dynasties, not only did Wu Qi distribute all the natural treasures that Great Yen was supposed to offer to Lao Ai to the 5 dynasties, he had also added a lot of fake benefits to them. If both Great Yen and Wu Qi could make a fortune, Princess Zhongli would not be in the mood to help the soldiers of the 5 dynasties improve their physiques and aptitudes. But now, since the 5 dynasties had been slaughtered by Wu Qi, and had begun to plan the strategy of looting the land as soon as they arrived on Pangu continent, in order to make their looting more efficient, so that Wu Qi and Great Yen could get the benefits faster, and offer those natural treasures to Lao Ai as soon as possible, freeing the emperor and courtiers of Great Yen from the control of the Black Celestial Forbidden Curse, Princess Zhongli naturally had to give them some benefits. After the 1 billion soldiers were brought into the interstitial world, Princess Zhongli turned to look at the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties. Apart from the emperors and their most important courtiers and generals, all the members of the imperial clan and the descendants of the powerful clans were sucked into the interstitial world. Out of respect for the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties, they could not sneak into Pangu continent, but their children and grandchildren would not be given any preferential treatment. Before long, only the emperors and their most important courtiers were left on the earthen platform. There were only a few hundred of them, and they were the group of old men whom King Yangshan had brought to Myriad Immortals' planet, asking them to expand their territory and rebuild the foundation of the 6 dynasties. The emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties glanced at each other with complicated expressions. Then, led by Ing Zheng, they threw their heads back and roared with laughter, followed by the courtiers of the 6 dynasties. With a wave of his hand, a chariot driven by 9 flood dragons soared into the sky. Wu Qi, Princess Xianglu, and all the other people of the 6 dynasties entered the chariot one after another. A beam of black light shot into the sky from outside Ji City, and the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties quickly flew toward the nearest immortal lord's residence. Inside Ji City, the few kings of Great Yan's imperial clan who stayed in Ji City knelt down solemnly and bowed toward the rapidly disappearing black light in the sky. The future of the 6 dynasties was bleak. They might build an unprecedented foundation on Panga continent, or they might suffer heavy casualties or even be wiped out. In short, their future was unpredictable, and no one knew when they would meet again. With Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu leading the way, they quickly arrived at Yuhua Heavenly Realm. In the square in front of the immortal abode in Yuhua Immortal City, they stepped into the teleportation formation that would take them to Panga continent. At the moment, the atmosphere in Yuhua Immortal City was tense, and the atmosphere was extremely strange. The garrisons of the human race and the garrisons of the celestial court were eyeing each other covetously, as if a war would break out at the slightest disagreement. The once bustling Yuhua Immortal City had become sparsely populated. Apart from some cultivators and immortals who were born and bred in the city, as well as some merchants and peddlers who lived in the city for money, not a single living soul could be seen in the vast city. The whole place was deserted like a ghost city. Outside the teleportation formation that led to Panga continent, the garrisons of the celestial court and the garrisons of the human race stood facing each other on opposite sides of the square. There were 3,000 garrisons of the celestial court, while the garrisons of the human race had deployed 20,000 soldiers to set up camp in the square. Both sides were extremely nervous about the person who walked out of the teleportation formation. It would be fine if the person who walked out was an immortal or a cultivator, but once it was an ordinary mortal, the battle formation on both sides was thrown into chaos. Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu exchanged a glance. They knew that this was the consequence of their killing of Yuzong. Yuzong was in charge of the garrisons of the human race in the thousands of heavenly realms around Yuhua Heavenly Realm, and he was the supreme ruler of Deyu dynasty in Yuhua Heavenly Realm. Now that he was killed by 2 passing immortals, the higher-ups of Deyu could not help but wonder if the celestial court had done it on purpose. Therefore, the current tense atmosphere in Yuhua Immortal City was brought by Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu. They had just killed Yuzong casually, but for the higher-ups of Deyu, they could not see it that way. Panga continent was in a mess, and if the celestial court took the opportunity to attack the garrisons of the human race in the outer heavenly realms, the consequences would be too severe. That was why the atmosphere was so tense. If there were any mortals coming out of the teleportation formation, there would be a commotion among the people on both sides. The immortal officials of the celestial court had to be on guard to see if it was a new general sent by the human race, and if he would launch a retaliatory attack on Yuhua Heavenly Realm. The army of the human race, on the other hand, had to protect their new superior. If the new Marquis of Yuhua Heavenly Realm was killed, how could they explain it to their superiors? Because of such an atmosphere, when Wu Qi and his company walked into the teleportation formation, they were not questioned too much. The few immortal officials in charge of the teleportation formation hurriedly asked Wu Qi and his company to choose the corresponding teleportation formation on Panga continent, then activated it and sent them away. For these officials of the celestial court, it was better for all the unfamiliar cultivators to go to Panga continent, and not stay in Yuhua Immortal City and cause more trouble. At this moment, Yuhua Immortal City was like a huge barrel of gunpowder, and it could be detonated with just a spark. If any passing immortal got into a conflict with the garrisons of the human race here, it was bound to trigger a conflict that would sweep the entire Yuhua Heavenly Realm, and the consequence was something that even Heavenly Lord Sanyu, the highest immortal official in Yuhua Heavenly Realm, could not bear. Therefore, Wu Qi and his company arrived at Panga continent without a hitch. Along the way, with the help of Princess Zhang and Wu Qi, it took them less than 5 months to reach the Dian Immortal Pass, which Wu Qi had deliberately chosen, which was about 3 months away from Zhong province. Before Yan Dan, Yingzheng, and the other emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties could recover from the shock of the beautiful scenery and the excellent natural conditions on Panga continent, large groups of human soldiers had already surrounded them from all directions. Spears, halberds, bows, and crossbows were aimed at them, gleaming coldly. A human general strode over, pointed his finger at Wu Qi and his company, and snapped, "They are the rebels of Myriad Immortal Alliance. Kill them all." Muffled bangs kept ringing out as countless arrows rained down from above. Chapter 658. There was no warning or interrogation. Before Wu Qi and his companions could step out of the glowing teleportation formation, the garrison of the human race in Dian Immortal Pass had issued an order to kill them. A total of 3,000 human warriors with cultivation bases had surrounded the teleportation formation where Wu Qi and his companions were. 1,000 spearmen, 1,000 halberd wielders, and the remaining 1,000 were all armed with powerful bows and crossbows specially made by Diyu. Any teleportation formation on Panga continent that led to outer heavenly realms was jointly managed by the Celestial Court and Diyu. Especially in an immortal pass like Dian Immortal Pass, which was responsible for the customs, both the Celestial Court and Diyu had stationed a large number of soldiers. There were more than 5,000 immortal officials and soldiers of the Celestial Court stationed in Dian Immortal Pass, while Diyu had an army of 80,000 soldiers stationed here. At the moment, all the teleportation formations in Dian Immortal Pass were guarded by a number of human warriors, while the immortal officials and officials of the Celestial Court were standing on the treetops far away on the mountaintops, pointing and gesticulating. No one tried to stop them. The immortal officials and officials of the Celestial Court were all wearing strange smiles as they watched Wu Qi and his companions being bombarded by thousands of arrows fired from bows and crossbows. Damn it! Wu Qi took a deep breath. He dared not to use his true body of heaven and earth, but had exercised the dragon transformation with all his might. Dragon scales gleaming with a dazzling black light emerged from under his skin, and by the time the first arrow was approaching him, he had transformed into a black dragon that stood on his hind legs. He took a step sideways and stood in front of Princess Zhanglu, shielding Princess Zhanglu with his tall, scaly body that looked extremely strange. Dozens of arrows hit Wu Qi at the same time. Some of them burst into flames, some of them burst into thunderbolts, and a few of them let out shrill ghost howls as they shot out dark smoke, trying to penetrate Wu Qi's body. Some of them even melted when they touched his skin, spraying a greenish venom all over him. The flame could not burn through his dragon scales, and the thunderbolts could not penetrate them. With a casual shake of his body, he unleashed a vast and pure dragon aura that shattered the black smoke that contained an eerie aura of death. But, the pale green venom was extremely brutal. Every scale that was attached to the venom was softened piece by piece, and was constantly spraying out large sheets of dark smoke that came with a strange smell of ambergris. The venom had corroded his scales and touched the flesh underneath them. A sharp pain came, and Wu Qi let out a muffled groan. His eyes went wide, and suddenly, a stream of stinking black liquid sprayed out of his mouth. Ao Buzan had obtained a great benefit in Myriad Immortal's planet. His cultivation base had recovered to the realm of Gold Immortal, and he had condensed a thread of his bloodline and given it to Wu Qi. Now, Wu Qi could transform into a real black dragon with the divine ability of the 7 Foundation elevating technique. At the same time, he also possessed all the innate divine abilities of the Black Dragon clan. This stream of stinking black liquid was the evil rotting true water, which was the specialty of the Black Dragon clan that Ao Buzan belonged to. It was hundreds of times more turbulent than the water spewed out of a high-pressure faucet. The stream of water was as thick as a water tank, and it sent dozens of soldiers who were lunging at Wu Qi flying far away with spears and halberds in their hands. The soldiers were soaked by the black stream of water. They rolled miserably on the ground, looking like ribs that had been stewed in boiling water for a day and a night. Chunks of flesh and blood kept falling off their bodies while thick white smoke billowed out of them. In just the blink of an eye, the soldiers were corroded into skeletons, and their souls were devoured by the black stream of water and melted away without a trace. Lying on top of Wu Qi's head, Ao Buzan marveled at the power and purity of Wu Qi's evil rotting true water. Then, he opened his mouth and shot out a long tongue, rolling up 7 to 8 soldiers whose cultivation bases had barely reached the realm of heaven immortal and swallowing them. He burped lightly and spat out a large amount of clothes, hats, shoes, socks, and bronze half-body armors. The sudden attack had enraged the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states. Although they had learned from Wu Qi what Panga continent was like now before they came to Panga continent, how could these proud emperors and courtiers of the 6 states, who had always regarded themselves as Lao Tzu's number 1 under the heaven, swallow their anger when they were really attacked? Yen Dan gave a cold snort. A great plume of grayish-white energy rushed out from behind him, and the disk of heavenly Tao transmigration rushed out with a muffled noise. The great plume of grayish-white energy transformed into countless arrows and shot out in all directions. Wherever they passed, as long as someone was hit by these arrows, the soldiers would howl and fall to the ground, their souls sucked straight into the disk of heavenly Tao transmigration and crushed them to pieces. Ingzheng roared and gave a long roar. Behind him, the shadows of 9 flood dragons soared into the sky. Accompanied by a deafening dragon roar, Ingzheng charged into the ranks of Deyu's soldiers like a heavy chariot. With the sword of Qin Emperor in his hand, he would hack a dozen soldiers in half together with their weapons with each swing. From time to time, he would throw out punches with his left hand, each punch like a meteor falling to the ground and stirring up a huge storm. Before the arrows could get close to him, they were knocked away by the energy punches and injured countless human soldiers. Baiqi, Wang Jian, Meng Ao, Li Xian, Zhang Han, and a group of fierce generals of Qin army followed closely behind Ingzheng, slaughtering without saying a word. Countless sword beams flashed across the battlefield, and large numbers of Deyu's soldiers were chopped to pieces while howling miserably. Wang Jian, Meng Ao, Zhang Han, and the others were still fine. At most, the soldiers killed by them were chopped into 3 pieces. But, those who dared to stand in front of Baiqi were all chopped into meat paste by the sword beams that shot out from Baiqi's body. The sky was filled with a mist of blood, and the meat paste and broken limbs were sprayed in all directions, with the furthest distance being several miles away. Baiqi and his company of killing gods were like a pack of white tigers dashing into a flock of lambs. With just a single charge, they had cut the formation of Deyu's army of 3,000 soldiers in half. In a flurry, a few Deyu's captains wielded their weapons and mobilized their soldiers to encircle and annihilate this group of ferocious monsters. But, when the highest-ranking officer among them, the silver medallion colonel, had just given out a few orders, the twang of a bowstring was heard. It was Li Xian who had pulled the bowstring and released an arrow. A bright beam shot out and pierced through the colonel and 18 elite soldiers behind him. The other captains were struck dumb as they watched their superior slowly fall to the ground with his hand covering the hole in his throat. Before they could figure out how they should deal with this matter, Jing Ke had appeared right next to them like a ghost. A startling beam of light flashed across the sky, as Jing Ke transformed into a blinding beam of light and pierced through the hearts of these captains and their personal guards in a blink of an eye. The beam of light swept across the Deyu's army. Jing Ke had killed 7 Deyu colonels and 38 captains, then returned to Yen Dan, his body covered in blood. A deep, muffled roar that sounded like the roar of a fiend suddenly rang out. Fan Yuqi, whose body was as sturdy as an iron ingot, together with Lian Pe, Yu Yi, and the other fearsome generals of the 6 states, formed a small formation of arrows and rushed into the formation of Deyu's army from a side. Although there were less than 30 generals in this small assault formation, think about what kind of people they were, right? Apart from the generals of Qin state who were fighting alone, the famous generals of the other 5 states were also in this formation. Which of these men was not a famous general who had killed countless people? Which of them was not a mighty hero who had fought against millions of soldiers? The aura emanating from each of these men was stronger than the aura formed by the formation of 80,000 human soldiers in Dian Immortal Pass. Wherever this small formation went, people were thrown off their feet and horses were thrown off their feet. With just a casual strike from them, several tens of human soldiers would be smashed into pieces. Among these Dayu generals and soldiers, there were many whose cultivation base was even stronger than this group of ferocious gods. However, most of the time, with just a casual stare from Fan Yuqi and the others, they could easily kill these Dayu generals, whose cultivation base was 1, 2, or even 3 or 4 tiers higher than them. In just the time of a few breaths, the 3,000 Dayu generals who besieged Wu Qi and his men were all slaughtered. At this point of time, even the 4 emperors, Tian Wen, Zhao Sheng, Chu Ping, and Wei Wuji, as well as a large number of civilian and military officials around them, did not manage to strike. Broken limbs of 3,000 generals and soldiers were scattered all over the ground, and the ground was covered with sticky blood. The emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties turned a blind eye to it, lifting up their sleeves and wiping the weapons in their hands, talking and laughing as if they were on a field trip. There were several tens of thousands of Dayu soldiers stationed in the vicinity, but none of the people from the 6 dynasties took them seriously. Useless chickens and stray dogs, so weak that they can't even withstand a single blow. But their cultivation base is not bad. If they fall into my hands and are trained for a year, each of them will have the foundation of an elite army. As the man with the most ferocious reputation among all the people present, Baiqi made a pertinent assessment of these Dayu generals and soldiers while lazily wiping his sword. Their cultivation base was not bad, and many of them were even much stronger than the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties. But, as for their fighting prowess, they were just mediocre. In the eyes of Baiqi and the others, these Dayu generals and soldiers who guarded Dian Immortal Pass were just a bunch of little chicks. They did not know what war was, and what slaughter was. The cruelty and efficiency of the massacre stunned everyone present. The chief general of Dian Immortal Pass looked stiffly at the broken limbs around Wu Qi and the others, and his body trembled slightly uncontrollably. The eyes of the immortal monarch of the celestial court stationed in Dian Immortal Pass suddenly lit up. He grabbed his subordinates around him and ordered them in a low voice to find out the origin of Wu Qi and the others. If they could be drawn to the celestial court and become officials of the celestial court, that would be the best. The bizarre atmosphere lasted for the time it took to finish a pot of tea. When Wu Qi and the others cleaned up the blood on their bodies and were about to leave Dian Immortal Pass, the general stationed here by Great Yu suddenly pointed at Wu Qi and the others and shouted at the top of his voice, "All rebels of Myriad Immortal Alliance, listen up. Form the 6 gates immortal slaughtering formation and trap and kill them. No, leave a few of them alive. I want to hack them into 1,000 pieces, turn their bones into ashes." Ha! 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 3 loud roars rang out in a row. Of the 80,000 soldiers stationed in Dian Immortal Pass, tens of thousands of them, except for the 3,000 killed by Wu Qi and the others, sprang into action. In just a few seconds, they had formed a formation around Wu Qi and the others, measuring dozens of miles in circumference. Dozens of large flying ships flew out of a distant valley, surrounded by over 3,000 oracles from the Directorate of Celestials as they approached at high speed. The oracles of the Directorate of Celestials began to recite strange incantations. Countless bone talismans were quickly crushed by them, and a great sheet of bright light sprinkled down as all the soldiers of Great Yu were enchanted with layer after layer of restrictive spells. Amidst the sonorous recitation of the oracles, the eyes of tens of thousands of soldiers turned red, and their morale soared 100-fold. The surrounding natural energy suddenly stagnated, and 6 beams of light pierced into the sky from the center of Dayu's formation, transforming into 6 gates that sealed off the surrounding void. An enormous pressure came from all directions, causing Wu Qi and the others to stiffen instantly, and making their movements more difficult. Chapter 659. The 6 Gates Immortal Killing Formation was one of the military formations commonly used by the Great Yu Army, and its structure was very similar to that of the 6 Flags Gate used by the Immortals. The 6 Gates Gate used by the Immortals were divided into different types, such as Illusory Formation, Maze Formation, Trapping Formation, Killing Formation, and so on. But, the 6 Gates Immortal Killing Formation was different. After being studied and modified by the Great Yu Military Court and the Directorate of Celestials, it was filled with endless variations, countless ambushes, and deadly traps. It was a formation crafted purely for killing. As soon as the formation was completed, the surrounding natural energy was immediately driven away, and even the underground energy veins were forcibly diverted by the power of the formation, avoiding the area 1,000 miles around Dian Immortal Pass. Dian Immortal Pass had become a land of death devoid of natural energy. For the immortals and cultivators who had to rely on natural energy to unleash their strongest power, it was the most disadvantageous battlefield. But, the human warriors were not affected by the formation at all. Their strong fleshly bodies allowed them to unleash all their power in the formation. The power of the oracles mostly came from the ghosts and deities they worshipped, or other spirits under the heaven. They borrowed the power of heaven and earth without consuming any natural energy. In the Six Gates Immortal Killing Formation, the overall strength of the human warriors was not affected at all, while the overall strength of the immortals and cultivators was at least halved. When the 6 light screens converged in midair and transformed into a hexagonal column that enveloped the area 100 miles around, Yen Dan, Ing Zheng, and the others frowned at the same time. Except for cultivators who purely cultivated their bodies like Baiqi and Fan Yuqi, the emperors and ministers of the other 6 dynasties had also felt the impact of the disappearance of natural energy. They felt uneasy all over, like fish out of water. Compared to the situation where there was no natural energy in the outside world, the abundant immortal energy in Yen Dan and the others was gradually spreading out through their skin. Not only was the formation driving away the natural energy in the vicinity, but it was also extracting the magic energy in Yen Dan and the others. Baiqi snorted coldly. Among all the generals of the 6 states, he was the most murderous. Seeing De Yu's army encircling the human warriors, Baiqi pulled out his long sword, flashed across the air, and dashed straight towards those over 10,000 human warriors in the west, leaving a white beam of light in the air. A strong murderous aura condensed around Baiqi. Suddenly, the shadow of a white tiger rose from behind Baiqi. Accompanied by a terrifying whistling sound, Baiqi rose into the air and slashed down at the army in front of him. As the sword slashed down, dozens of tiger head-shaped astral swords whizzed out, bringing with them a threatening murderous aura. In the formation, De Yu soldiers roared out in unison. 300 soldiers with foot-thick bronze shields darted out with large strides. The shields were connected to each other, forming a thick iron defense line in front of Baiqi. These bronze shields were about a foot thick, 10 feet tall, and 5 feet wide. They looked ancient, and seemed to be at least thousands of years old. The surface of the cyan shield was engraved with complicated patterns of ghosts and gods. When these patterns were pieced together, they formed a complicated talisman restriction. A deafening boom rang out as Baiqi's astral sword struck the shields. The 300 soldiers gave a muffled snort, their muscles and bones bulging as they staggered backward. Each of the astral swords unleashed by Baiqi weighed more than 1,000,000 kilograms. Even though these soldiers had almost broken through the realm of First Panga Heaven, they were still forced back by Baiqi's sword strike. But that was all they could do. Plumes of green smoke and fire burst out of the shields, which formed a huge ghost head and devoured the astral swords. Although the soldiers were forced back, the astral swords did not hurt them at all. They only felt a sharp pain in their arms. As soon as the 300 soldiers retreated, heavy footsteps could be heard coming from behind. 1,800 soldiers, each holding a defensive shield, lined up in 6 lines of 300 soldiers, marched forward to greet Qiqi. Baiqi's face flickered. He had used all his strength in the strike just now, but he did not smell any blood, which made him feel ashamed. Behind him, another 6 lines of soldiers marched forward. Clearly, his hope of breaking this formation had failed. As a leading general, Baiqi was well aware of how powerful an army could be when they were in formation. If he failed to destroy this formation with his first strike, it would be futile for him to continue attacking. Indignantly, Baiqi spat out a mouthful of saliva and prepared to retreat in a beam of white light. But, the 6 Directions Immortals slaying formation was the trump card of the human army stationed in Dian Immortal Pass. Now that Baiqi had broken into it, how could he retreat so easily? But, When he was less than 100 feet away, 3 moon oracles standing on a flying ship above him, each with 7 crescent moons embroidered on their sleeves, raised their hands at the same time, and a strange-shaped bone armor in their palms shattered at the same time. Suddenly, the void behind Baichi rippled like water. Before Ingzhen could warn him, Baichi had already crashed into the ripple. In the blink of an eye, Baichi had appeared in the formation of 1,800 soldiers. 1,800 defensive shields formed a small steel fortress around Baichi. Amidst chuckles, the soldiers who trapped Baichi pulled out the javelins hidden behind their shields at the same time. Accompanied by the muffled beating of war drums, they raised the javelins with all their strength and threw them fiercely at Baichi. 1,800 sharp javelins, each as thick as a goose's egg and 6 feet long, shot toward Baichi at the same time. The overwhelming number of javelins created a sharp whistling sound, and the situation was like a nightmare. Baichi roared furiously. He swung his sword and was about to break the javelins when the dozen of human oracles in the sky blew the bone flutes made from the ribs of mermen at the same time. The melodious tune of the flutes drifted down, and Baichi's arm that was wielding the sword stopped abruptly. Countless illusions appeared before Baichi's eyes, mountains of gold and seas of silver, beautiful women, wine, women, and all sorts of other illusions. Baichi, who had killed countless lives, was confused by those illusions for about a second. Then, Baichi roared and shattered the illusions with a sky-high intent of killing. He wielded his sword and lunged forward. However, during this brief moment of hesitation, the 1,800 javelins divided into 18 waves and blocked all directions around him. Over 30 javelins in the first wave landed on Baichi's body simultaneously. Baichi's body, which had been rushing forward, was sent flying backward by the javelins. Along with ear-piercing noises, the javelins hit Baichi one after another. The javelins shattered one after another, but at the same time, blood spurted out from Baichi's body. Different from Wuqi's true body of heaven and earth scripture or dragon transformation script, although Baichi was also walking on the path of body cultivator, he paid more attention to the accumulation of killing intent and aura, and entered the Tao through endless killing. Baichi's fleshly body was not as strong as Wuqi's. His body was as tough as a diamond, impervious to all kinds of weapons and spears. These javelins were the secret weapons created by Diyu. When Baichi was hit by these javelins, his body could not withstand the attack of all kinds of strange curses attached to them. A muffled groan rang out as Baichi's left thigh was pierced through by a javelin that moved as fast as lightning. An extremely corrosive and gloomy aura sprayed out from the javelin, and soon, half of Baichi's thigh was dyed black. In the blink of an eye, the ferocious and brave Baichi grabbed the javelin and violently pulled it out. Dark blood splashed in all directions. Baichi staggered a few steps forward and nearly fell to the ground. Clenching his teeth furiously, Baichi roared furiously, "I'm too ashamed to see anyone today." Mixed with the boundless killing intent, a towering rage transformed into a white tiger with a pair of wings on its back and soared into the sky. Wisps of white light shot out from Baichi's eyes as he glared at those soldiers who surrounded him and roared, "Die! What are you waiting for? You're going to die soon." The bright gleams flashing on the bodies of 1,800 soldiers shattered at the same time, while all kinds of defensive spells cast on them by oracles were shattered by Baichi's glare. Suddenly, the soldiers who were holding the shields let out a miserable hiss, as their souls were shattered by Baichi's glare. Suddenly, countless wisps of white smoke mixed with broken soul fragments rushed out from their 7 apertures, transforming into streams of light that flowed into Baichi's body. Laughing hideously, the wounds on Baichi's body healed quickly, and even the piercing wound on his thigh had disappeared in just a short time. Raising his sword, Baichi taunted the soldiers of Diyu, who were slowly approaching from the back. Ingzhen gave a wild laugh, then turned to the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties and said complacently, "Prince of Wuan is mighty." Ha ha ha. Ingzhen was showing off his prowess, while all the ministers of Qin state were grinning from ear to ear. But, the faces of the emperors and ministers of the other 5 dynasties were unsightly. Their faces were dark, and they were cursing in their hearts. Why didn't this butcher get smashed into meat paste by the formation? Even though the six dynasties had formed an alliance, the emperors and ministers of Zhao's state did not have a good impression of Baiqi, especially towards a butcher like Baiqi. Standing off to one side, Wei Wuji ran his fingers through his beautiful swallowtail beard and said coolly, "This formation is divided into 6 gates. Why don't we attack 1 gate each? Hee, let's see who will be the first to break out of the formation. Why don't we bet 3,000 beauties?" The eyes of the emperors and ministers of various dynasties lit up, while Tianwen nodded smilingly and said, 3,000 beauties? That sounds very elegant. Laughing loudly, Tianwen waved his hand and led all the civil and military officials of Qi state to charge toward one of the formations. For a moment, the cries of battle broke out, as the emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties exercised their respective divine abilities and charged toward one of the formations. Betting with beauties? Wu Qi shook his head. He was too lazy to join the battle, as he did not want to snatch the prize. However, Princess Zhanglu grabbed him and forcefully dragged him toward the formation where the emperors and ministers of Great Yan were attacking. A bright gleam shone from Princess Zhongli's eyes as she cried out, "Husband, each of the 6 dynasties will bet 3,000 beauties. If we are the first to break out of the formation, won't all these beauties belong to us?" Princess Zhonglu winked at Wu Qi coquettishly and said with a smile, "Zi Xian has been worrying about choosing concubines for you. 10,000 beauties are more than enough for Zi Xian to choose the most beautiful and intelligent girl to fill up your mansion." Wu Qi nearly fell to the ground, while Yan Dan and Yan Qijuan cheered at the same time. "Zi Xian is right. Wu Qi, with your latent talent, you have to give birth to more children and grandchildren. Your children and grandchildren are also members of Great Yan's imperial clan." Yan Qijuan even raised a finger and said smilingly, "If we win, we'll choose 1,000 best girls from the bet. What do you think?" Wu Qi rolled his eyes. He had nothing to say to these people, whose values and morals were completely different from his own. However, Ao Buzan suddenly became extremely excited. He howled and soared into the sky, spitting out the purple inkstone with all his might. 1,000 beauties. I, Ao Buzan, am finally going to get rid of the body of a damned virgin. A purple gleam flashed as the inkstone hit the formation in front of them. Over 10,000 soldiers of Deyu state were smashed to pieces by the inkstone, and the entire 6 gates immortal slaughtering formation collapsed instantly. The formation suffered a backlash, causing tens of thousands of soldiers of Deyu state, Chi-Chi, to cough blood and fall to the ground. Chapter 660. The Purple Heart Inkstone was a treasure personally crafted by Lord Lu. Although it did not possess any sentience, the materials and techniques used to craft it were all precious materials and extremely complicated techniques that could only be used in crafting a primordial artifact. Although it was not a primordial artifact, its offensive strength was enough to put an ordinary gold immortal artifact to shame. The Purple Heart Inkstone shot out of Ao Buzan's little mouth and shot several miles away, trailing a dense purple smoke behind it. By the time it reached the sky above the battle formation, it had turned into a colossal object that measured several miles in circumference and was shrouded in purple smoke. As Ao Buzan gave a dragon cry, the Purple Heart Inkstone plunged whistling down from tens of miles in the sky and smashed onto the battle formation. Tens of thousands of Deyu soldiers were turned into ashes, and the 6 gates immortal slaughtering formation was disintegrated. The backlash had robbed all the soldiers of their ability to fight back, especially those oracles who were the core of the formation. Their fragile bodies suffered from the 9 backlashes when the formation was broken. Over 1,000 oracles exploded into clouds of blood mist in midair. Their souls howled and flew up into the sky, soon turning into nothingness under the sunlight. A few oracles who were attacking with vicious curses were killed by the backlash of the formation, and their souls were immediately devoured by the ghosts and deities they summoned. Vaguely, there were countless fiend shadows looming in the void, and the souls of those oracles were torn to shreds by those fiend shadows. Those who were powerful enough could even hear the greedy chewing noises made by those fiend shadows in the void. Kill, kill, kill. Baiqi kept waving his sword and letting out loud battle cries that pierced through the clouds. Led by Baiqi, the generals of the 6 states killed tens of thousands of Diyu soldiers as if they were cutting melons and vegetables. Corpses were strewn all over Dian Immortal Pass, while blood flowed and stained the ground. The pungent smell of blood made the faces of the immortal officials and officials of the heaven who were watching from the sidelines pale. The 80,000-strong garrison was wiped out by Wu Qi and a few hundred men. The immortal officials of the celestial court had good eyesight, so they could tell that Baiqi and the other emperors and ministers of the 6 states had just stepped into the realm of heaven immortals. But, they had wiped out the 80,000-strong garrison of Diyu soldiers, including several hundred generals and oracles whose cultivation bases were as strong as heaven immortals, and the general of Diyu stationed here was an expert of the 7 stars realm of the first Panga heaven. And yet, they were wiped out in such a short time. Although the Inkstone Ao Buzan seemed a little strange, the combat strength of the emperors and ministers of the 6 states seemed to be astonishing. Standing amidst the mountains of corpses and seas of blood with his sword in hand, Baiqi was contentedly absorbing the blood and killing aura in the surroundings to improve his strength. The cultivation technique he was cultivating could only make a better and faster breakthrough on the battlefield. The death of tens of thousands of Diyu soldiers had even stimulated the immortal energy in Baiqi's body, making him ready to make a breakthrough at any time. A few immortal officials of the celestial court cautiously approached Wu Qi and his company. Wang Jian, Li Xian, and the other Daqin generals, who were searching the corpses of Diyu soldiers for valuables, hastily stopped before the immortal officials. Wang Jian, who had a dignified appearance, stretched out his right arm and shouted in a deep voice, "Gentlemen, this road is blocked. Go and do what you are supposed to do. If we can wipe out these Diyu soldiers, we don't mind killing you as well." The killing intent emanating from Wang Jian nearly made the few immortal officials collapse to the ground. They gave Wang Jian a look with trembling bodies, then turned to look in surprise at the emperors and ministers of the 6 states, who were searching the corpses of the soldiers, refusing to let go of even a lower-grade energy stone. Clearing his throat, the leading immortal official mustered up his courage and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoists, by the order of immortal monarch Qianhua, the special envoy of the celestial court in Dian Immortal Pass, we would like to invite you over for a moment." Looking at Wang Jian, whose face was as dark as still water, the immortal official said in a low voice, "If you are having trouble with your hands, the salary of the celestial court is very generous." All the emperors and ministers of the 6 states heard the immortal official's words, but none of them paid him any attention. The salary of the celestial court was generous? Bribing them with generous bribes? The emperors of the 5 states, including Yingzheng, gave the immortal official a fierce look with their bloodshot eyes. Disregarding their dignity as emperors, they stooped down and fished out a few energy stones, spirit herbs, and ores from the belts of a few soldiers. The salary of the celestial court was generous? Could it be as generous as the astronomical amount of natural treasures proposed by Wu Qi? This damned black celestial forbidden curse. In order to break this frightening curse that had been haunting Yingzheng and his men for over 2,000 years, they had to pay a very high price. As the emperors of the 6 states, they had already begun to make money from the dead on the battlefield, and had begun to accumulate their belongings bit by bit, preparing to offer them to Lao Ai in exchange for the freedom of the emperors and ministers of the 6 states, as well as their descendants. So, how could they not be irritated by the fact that the salary of the celestial court was generous? If not for their weak overall strength, Yingzheng and the others would have thought of robbing the great emperors of the celestial court. Damn it, the price that Wu Qi gave them was just too frightening. When the eyes of Yingzheng and the others glared at them with a murderous aura and blood-red gleam, the majesty of an emperor and the frightening killing intent that came rushing at them made them shiver with fear. Without hesitation, they spun and fled. They were a group of murderous men who had gone mad. These immortal officials were experienced and knowledgeable, and what kind of people had they not seen before? Yingzheng and the others were just as frightening as those fiend immortals who had gone mad in their cultivation and spent all day refining fiend artifacts in piles of corpses. Perhaps, these immortal officials would really attack the subordinates of the celestial court stationed in Dian Immortal Pass. They did not want to offend these terrible people. After scaring away the few subordinates of the celestial court who wanted to recruit the people, the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties used the fastest speed to loot all the valuables from the tens of thousands of soldiers, and then stormed into the barracks and administrative center of Dayu and Dayan Immortal Pass. All the valuables were taken away, and even the water basin used by General Dayu's pet, a mixed-blood cloud treading green Qilin, was taken away by Qin Wuyang. The Qilin was too extravagant, as the water basin used by it to drink water was actually made from a green conch engraving stone. This stone was an excellent material for casting all kinds of cauldrons, and its value was very high. Qin Wuyang could not be blamed for this. The emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties were now so poor that they were like a swarm of locusts, looting everything wherever they went. After looting the barracks and administrative center of Dayu's garrison, the emperors and ministers of the 6 dynasties returned to the square where the teleportation formation in Dayan Immortal Pass was located. Behind them was the barracks of Dayu's garrison, and in front of them were the palaces where the immortal officials of the celestial court worked, as well as the pavilions where they usually lived. Be it the barracks of Dayu's garrison or the administrative center, they were all made of huge rocks, and looked dark and not very valuable. But, the palaces and pavilions of the immortals were different. The floors were paved with golden bricks, the walls were made of white jade, and the tiles were carved from various beautiful jade. Their pillars were either made of pure gold or pure silver, or all kinds of precious materials such as crystals, corals and hawksbill turtles. At first glance, the residences of the immortals were luxurious, and filled with an air of wealth. It seems that we still need a lot of natural treasures to completely free the people of the 6 dynasties from that vicious restrictive spell. Chu Ping murmured with a frown while stroking the good-looking little beard on his chin. Ing Zheng narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "The salary of the celestial court is very high." Wei Wuji's eyes shone with a greedy gleam as he sneered and said, "These people in front of us do not have a strong cultivation base. Judging from their aura, they look like lambs." Zhao Xing said straightforwardly, "If you want to rob us, just say it." As long as we kill them, who will know that we have robbed here before?" Tian Wen and Yan Dan exchanged a glance, shook their heads, and produced their prime magical treasures without saying a word. The emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties looked at each other and smiled. Then, led by the emperors, hundreds of valiant generals and wise civil ministers, Chi-Chi, produced all kinds of magical treasures and charged aggressively toward the people of the celestial court, who were caught off guard. A few breaths later, Baichi came to the forefront proudly. Waving his sword, he cried out, "Let's spread out. Daqin, attack from the front, Great Zhao, outflank them from the back, Great Wei, Great Qi, surround them from the left and right, and Great Yen, prevent them from escaping through the air." My friends from Great Yen, if they escape through the earth, can anyone run faster than you with the Tao of Ghost and Deity? The emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties roared in unison, and according to Baichi's order, they surrounded the people of the celestial court in Dayan Immortal Pass. Daqin, who was charging head-on, possessed an amazing combative strength, and the men of Daqin all had excellent prime magical treasures. The immortals howled and howled miserably, unable to fight back. The men of Great Zhao all had excellent mounts, and they had inherited the tradition of riding and shooting in the past. With just one charge, they had shattered the restrictive spells of the immortals. The men of Great Wei and Great Qi were very strong, and they surrounded the immortals from the left and right, forcing them to flee like rats. Some immortals tried to escape through the air, but Yan Dan's disc of heavenly Tao transmigration hovered high in the sky, killing every immortal who tried to fly up. There was also a beam of light that Jing Ke had transformed into. No matter what kind of prime immortal artifact you had, you could not withstand his deadly strike. Sun Kuang and Han Fei had unleashed a series of marvelous techniques, confusing the immortals who soared into the sky, and soon, they were all killed by Great Yan's siege. As for old Mr. Mod, well, he had taken out Mo City, which was 10 times larger, and was now dozens of miles in circumference. As soon as Mo City was out, the immortals went straight underground, and no longer had the courage to take the air route. Unfortunately, the ground was already occupied by millions of Yin ghosts and deities. As soon as the immortals entered the ground, they were surrounded by countless ghosts and deities, never to crawl out again. In just half a quarter of an hour, all the men of the celestial court in Dian Immortal Pass were wiped out, and all the treasures they had plundered in Dian Immortal Pass had become the war trophies of the 6 states. Just as the men of the 6 states were plundering everything in and out of the Immortal Pass, the void suddenly darkened, and then a patch of void shattered. A pitch-black supreme tower, divided into 6 grades from top to bottom, flew out of the shattered void. A shrill whistle rang out, and all the living beings within 10,000 miles of Dian Immortal Pass fell to the ground, unconscious. Wu Qi and the men of the 6 states felt their souls were shaken by the whistle, and they were nearly dragged out of their bodies. Fortunately, they all had powerful treasures with them, especially Ying Zheng, who had unleashed the Cauldron of Yu. With all the extraordinary treasures working together, their souls were finally saved. But, the strange whistle had still severely wounded them. Even Ao Buzan, who was lying on top of Wu Qi's head, coughed out a mouthful of blood despite his cultivation base as a gold immortal. Wu Qi smiled bitterly as he stared at the black supreme tower above him. Why would a supreme high priest suddenly appear here? Chapter 661. The lone, pitch-black supreme tower hovered above everyone's head, and shrill cries that sounded like the cries of apes kept coming out from it. The cries were not sharp, hoarse, soft, or soft. In short, they sounded ordinary, like the cries of a cat that had been starved for 3 days and 3 nights and had its tail stepped on. But, these cries, which sounded ordinary, had completely suppressed Wu Qi and his company. The Cauldron of Yu was hovering high above Ying Zheng's head, sending out dark waves that swept across all directions. But, when they were hit by the cries, the waves burst out and scattered in all directions. If not because Yen Dan and the other few emperors were protected by extraordinary treasures that were not weaker than the Cauldron of Yu, just a few cries alone would have killed Wu Qi and his company. Li Xian pulled out the longbow backhandedly, and a pale silver arrow was knocked on the bowstring. His pupils constricted to the size of a needle tip, and his divine will locked onto the supreme tower hovering about 1 mile above his head. Li Xian pulled the bowstring, injecting all his spirit and energy into the arrow. A dazzling silver light burst out from the silver sword, and a faint halo began to ripple and spread out from the arrowhead. Vaguely, there were a few circles of tiny runes spinning rapidly amidst the halo. A burly figure appeared behind Li Xian's back, and the movement of this man was exactly the same as Li Xian. When both of them pulled the bowstring at the same time, their figures merged into one, and the light on the silver arrow became even more blinding. Suddenly, Li Xian loosened his fingers, and the arrow shot straight towards the supreme tower with a shrill whistle. Right after the arrow left the bowstring, the light on it began to shrink rapidly. When the arrow was about to hit the supreme tower, it had turned into a strange black color. All the light along the way was absorbed by the arrow, and the void near the arrow was twisted and distorted. If one looked along the path of the arrow, everything he saw would be twisted. When the arrow was only 3 inches away from hitting the supreme tower, 2 skinny and shriveled fingers appeared silently in front of the arrow. The pitch-black fingers gently pinched, and the arrow, which had gathered all of Li Xian's energy, obediently stopped between the 2 fingers like the most obedient puppy. Suddenly, Wu Qi leaped into the air and gave Li Xian a powerful kick on his buttocks. Li Xian, who had just unleashed the arrow, had depleted all his energy and spirit, and had lost all his strength. He cried out in shock and was sent flying several hundred feet away by the kick. While Ying Zheng and the others were about to scold Wu Qi, a black beam shot over at a rapid speed and brushed past Li Xian's scalp, nearly piercing through his skull. After the shriveled finger caught Li Xian's arrow, the finger flicked, and the arrow bounced back at a speed 10 times faster than when it was shot. If it weren't for Wu Qi kicking Li Xian away, that arrow would have killed Li Xian instantly. Because of Wu Qi's attack, the arrow didn't hit Li Xian. It only shot into the ground with a black light. Everyone's faces turned extremely unsightly when they saw the thumb-sized hole in the ground with their divine sense. With just a casual flick of the 2 shriveled fingers, the arrow shot by Li Xian just now went nearly 3,000 miles into the ground. This was not an ordinary planet like those in outer heavenly realms, but Pangu continent. The rocks here were at least 100 times harder than those in outer heavenly realms. In other words, if it were in outer heavenly realms, the force of a flick of the two fingers would be enough to pierce through dozens of ordinary planets. Even Ing Zheng's cauldron of Yu, Yen Dan's disk of heavenly Tao transmigration, and the extraordinary treasures of the other 4 emperors could not withstand the power of the arrow. 6 extraordinary treasures struck at the same time, barely blocking the whistling sound coming out of the Supreme Tower, and yet, with just a casual flick of his finger, the defense jointly deployed by the 6 emperors was penetrated. This is urgent, and we are in danger. With the scroll in his left hand and the writing brush in his right, immortal energy surged out of his body as he assumed a fighting stance. Not only Han Xian, but all the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states had mustered up all their strength, ready to fight the man in the Supreme Tower with the help of various extraordinary treasures. Wu Qi gave a cold snort and cried out in a low voice, "The overall strength of the Supreme Oracle is strong enough to fight a primordial immortal. How can we be his match? An opponent who could fight a primordial immortal?" As soon as Wu Qi said that, even Ing Zheng, who was the proudest of them all, could not help but turn pale. His body swayed a few times, and he almost fell to the ground. Although they were conceited and arrogant, they were not arrogant fools. They all knew very well what kind of existence a primordial immortal was. With their cultivation bases as heaven immortals, challenging a supreme oracle who could fight a primordial immortal was no different from courting death. Even with a spirit treasure like the Cauldron of Yu, they could not fight a supreme oracle. His words almost destroyed the will of the emperors and courtiers of the 6 states. They stared blankly at the pitch-black Supreme Tower, and could not help but feel a sense of powerlessness and weakness. Blue veins were bulging on the back of the hands of Ing Zheng, Yen Dan, and the other emperors, but they could not give any orders. In the face of an absolute gap in strength, whether it was resistance or escape, it was futile. If they acted rashly, they would be laughed at by the enemy. Wu Qi shook his head and sighed faintly. Fortunately, he had long prepared for this, and was prepared for the current situation. Grabbing Ao Buzan from the top of his head, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "It's time for you to play your role. Go now." A few green fiend shadows flickered on Wu Qi's body, while 6 celestial fiend puppets soared whistling into the sky. Grabbing Ao Buzan by the neck, Wu Qi threw Ao Buzan up into the sky like a dead snake. A hoarse and unpleasant laugh was heard coming from the Supreme Tower, mixed with a few violent coughs. "You know I'm a Supreme Oracle, but what else do you want? Why don't you put down all your weapons and magical treasures and surrender? Hee, you can wipe out the garrison army of Dian Immortal Pass in such a short time, which shows that you do have some abilities. Judging from your behavior, you should be the core elites of Myriad Immortal Alliance, right? If you surrender obediently, you might be able to." Before the man could finish, Ao Buzan and the 6 celestial fiend puppets had soared into the sky, unleashing a bizarre aura right next to the Supreme Tower. In a flash, Ao Buzan's aura broke through from the early stage Heaven Immortal realm to the realm of Gold Immortal. At the same time, the aura of Wu Qi's puppets soared from the early stage Heaven Immortal realm, and before long, reached the level of peak stage Heaven Immortal. A few months ago, Ao Buzan had obtained the enormous energy provided by Lei Meng's blood sacrifice on Myriad Immortal's planet. Therefore, with his previous foundation, he could restore his cultivation base to the realm of Gold Immortal without any difficulty. With Ao Buzan's miraculous innate chaotic dragon body, as long as he held back his aura, the heavenly Tao could not find any trace of him, and thus could not strike down a thunder tribulation to deal with him. Just like Wu Qi, he did not have to worry about the thunder tribulation anymore. But, once he took the initiative to unleash his aura of breaking through, it was as if a man covered in black had suddenly poured kerosene on himself in the middle of a dark night, igniting a huge fire. With that, it was impossible for him not to be discovered. As soon as Ao Buzan unleashed his aura, the sky was immediately blanketed with a thick layer of purple-red clouds. Countless thick bolts of lightning could be seen rolling in the clouds, and soon, a huge cloud vortex took shape in the middle of the clouds. As the 6 celestial fiend puppets unleashed their auras, the purple-red clouds abruptly turned dark purple. The bright bolts of lightning were now coated with a pale blood-red color, and with each wave of lightning that flashed across, the ground was painted with a faint layer of blood. The cultivation base of the puppets mainly followed the advancement of Wu Qi's cultivation base. Now that Wu Qi had the overall strength of a peak-level heaven immortal, the overall strength of the puppets had gradually caught up with him. Especially after he came to Panga continent, he had given all the rare ores and energy stones he found to these celestial fiend puppets. As a result, these puppets had gone through a thorough transformation. At this moment, just like Ao Buzan, they had unleashed their aura of breaking through, and the heavenly tribulation they attracted became even more terrifying. The purple-red tribulation clouds of gold immortals immediately turned dark purple, the nirvana tribulation clouds that targeted top-grade gold immortals. Wu Qi chuckled as he tried his best to unleash his aura. Princess Xianglu rolled her eyes at Wu Qi, then followed suit and unleashed all her aura. An enormous energy wave towered into the sky. Ying Zheng and the others were smart men. When they saw what Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu were doing, they laughed maliciously and unleashed all their aura without reservation. The thunder tribulation of immortals had a very frightening characteristic, and that was the ability to implicate others. When the thunder tribulation descended, only the immortal who was transcending the tribulation could exist within 1,000 miles. If any cultivator or immortal was within this range, the power of the thunder tribulation would increase exponentially. The most vexing thing was that the lightning tribulation was extremely intelligent. It would prioritize killing the strongest cultivators within its range, then kill the weaker immortals and cultivators within its range one by one. When Wu Qi first came to Panga continent, he had used the thunder tribulation to kill an expert who was almost at the realm of gold immortal. Today, he was using Ao Buzan's hand to attract the tribulation, so that he could become Feng Fu again, and use the old trick to teach the old oracle a lesson. Suddenly, countless dazzling green runes burst out from the dark surface of the Supreme Tower, pouring down from the top of the tower like a stream of water. An old, angry, yet horrified voice suddenly rang out, "Shameless juniors, how can you be so shameless? I'm so angry." The intelligence of the thunder tribulation was the strongest. Since the Supreme Oracle was hiding in the Supreme Tower, the thunder tribulation had targeted his body and soul first. The dark purple tribulation cloud changed again. It turned from dark purple to pitch black, and then gradually faded from pitch black to a strange gray. Finally, it turned into a chaotic and tumbling tribulation cloud of gray and white like a pot of porridge. The tribulation cloud had evolved from the ordinary tribulation cloud of gold immortals to the innate divine thunder of yin and yang, which was specially targeted at primordial immortals. It was a terrible thunder tribulation that could pose a fatal threat to even a primordial immortal, and even someone with a primordial immortal item might not be able to survive it. A furious howl rang out from within the Supreme Tower. The void around it shattered with a deafening rumble, and the huge Supreme Tower suddenly vanished without a trace. 99% of the thunder tribulation in the sky had disappeared, and it had already chased after the Supreme Tower. Unless the unlucky Supreme Oracle could destroy the tribulation cloud, the thunder tribulation would always target him like a maggot, and he would not be able to get rid of it even if he could break through the void and flee. Ao Buzan took a deep breath and abruptly retracted his aura, while the 6 celestial fiend puppets quickly hid their auras back into their bodies. Then, Wu Qi waved his hand, and a large sheet of chaotic light enveloped everyone. Using a mystic art of hiding energy, he brought the emperors and courtiers of the 6 dynasties and fled into the distance at the fastest speed. The tribulation cloud suddenly lost its target. After hesitating for a moment in the sky, the gray and white tribulation cloud trembled, and then countless thunderbolts struck down from it. The Dian Immortal Pass was completely destroyed. Half a month later, a shocking news spread across Deyu. Gaochen Guang, the left minister of Deyu's Directorate of Celestials, was severely wounded by the thunder tribulation, and was forced to abandon his fleshly body to be reincarnated. He did not even have the chance to leave his last words. The human emperor was furious and ordered the whole nation to be mobilized to wipe out Myriad Immortal Alliance. Chapter 662. When the news of Gaochen Guang's death came, Wu Qi and his companions, who had changed their appearances, were on a long journey. Clad in the most common sackcloth of Diyu, Wu Qi and his companions exercised escape arts and headed toward Zhong province. Accompanying Wu Qi and his companions were Yan Dan and the other emperors and ministers of Great Yan. As for Ing Zheng and the other emperors and ministers of the 5 dynasties, they had gone to other places to develop their territories according to the terms of the treaty. According to the treaty, the future strategies of the 6 dynasties would be different, so that there would not be any conflict of interest. In just half a month, when Wu Qi and his companions were still 2.5 months away from Zhong province, the news of Gao Chengguang's death had spread across the entire Diyu. Even the secretive itinerant cultivators whom Wu Qi and his companions occasionally met in the wilderness began to discuss the impact of Gao Chengguang's death on the imperial court of Diyu. There were even some immortals and itinerant cultivators from Myriad Immortal Alliance who were cursing the bastard who killed Gao Chengguang hysterically. The Gaochen clan was the descendant of the great Emperor Gaochen of the ancient celestial court. The great Emperor Gaochen joined the celestial court as a human and ruled over all the demons under the heaven. He was the strongest figure among the 5 celestial emperors of the celestial court at that time. He had gone through several calamities of heaven and earth, until a terrible calamity destroyed more than half of the celestial court. In order to protect the legacy of the celestial court, the great Emperor Gaochen used a forbidden art to resolve the calamity, but in the end, he himself was turned into ashes. Because of the great Emperor Gaochen, the Gaochen clan had a very good relationship with the celestial court. Those immortals who were saved by the great Emperor Gaochen had now occupied a high position in the celestial court. In the dynasty of Diyu, the members of the Gaochen clan, who had inherited the bloodline of the great Emperor Gaochen, were born with the ability to communicate with ghosts and deities, and rule over all the demons under the heaven. In the Directorate of Celestials of Diyu, they were a very important power, and even the Yu clan in Liangzhu could not compare to them. Gao Chengguang was not only the left minister of Diyu's Directorate of Celestials, but also the teacher of the current human emperor of Diyu when he was the crown prince. He was also the teacher of the few most powerful princes in Diyu. His cultivation base was profound, and he had a wide circle of friends. In Great Yu, he was a famous minister and powerful minister. Gao Chengguang's daughter was married to the current human emperor, and the current crown prince of Great Yu was Gao Chengguang's grandson. As an important minister of Diyu, Gao Chengguang had secretly left Liangzhu after Myriad Immortal Alliance had stirred up the chaos in the 4 regions of Diyu, and from time to time, he would eliminate powerful figures from the alliance. In just over a year, nearly 100 gold immortals had been killed by him, and the number of heaven immortals and ordinary cultivators was incalculable. However, with Gao Chengguang's identity and status, it would be extremely embarrassing if news of him dealing with these juniors were to spread out. Therefore, Gao Chengguang's movements were very secretive. Every time he struck, he would leave immediately after, and once he succeeded, he would flee hundreds of millions of miles away. Even the Directorate of Celestials of Diyu did not know that their left minister, the father-in-law of the current human emperor, and the current clan leader of the Gaochen clan, had secretly left Liangzhu to join the war. Worst of all, in order to hide his tracks, Gao Chengguang did not use the supreme tower that he had been refining with his blood and sweat. Instead, he secretly took out a spare supreme tower from the storeroom of the Directorate of Celestials. The supreme tower was a magical item tailor-made for the supreme oracle of Diyu, and was equivalent to a primordial immortal item of a primordial immortal. It was a powerful weapon. Every single brick in the Supreme Tower was refined by the Supreme Oracles with their own blood essence, and every rune was carved with the blood of their own hearts. Therefore, they could synchronize with each other and enhance the combat ability of the Supreme Oracles by dozens of times. It was a giant weapon that could be used both offensively and defensively. As this spare Supreme Tower had not been refined by Gao Chengguang, apart from the most basic function of breaking through the void as a means of transportation, it had almost zero offensive and defensive functions. However, given Gao Chengguang's formidable strength, he did not fight the elders of the Divine Hall head-on. Instead, he stealthily killed the peripheral members of the Myriad Immortal Alliance. He did not need to use the other functions of the Tower of Babel. No one expected that Gao Chengguang would encounter a freak like Wu Qi. Instead of transcending the lightning tribulation after making a breakthrough, he hid the aura of the breakthrough in his body, and when he encountered a strong enemy, he would suddenly release the aura and attract the heavenly tribulation to attack the enemy. Which ordinary immortal would dare to do such a thing? When breaking through a realm, they would release the aura as soon as possible, so that they could attract the heavenly tribulation and transcend it as soon as possible. If they hid the aura in their body and accidentally leaked it when they were cultivating in the future, the heavenly tribulation would come when they could not move at all. Wouldn't that be courting death? It was tantamount to living with a ticking time bomb, and no ordinary immortal would dare to do such a thing. However, Gao Guang had encountered top-notch immortals like Wu Qi and Ao Buzan. The heavenly tribulation came one after another, attracting the innate yin-yang division godly thunder, which struck down randomly and smashed the unprepared Gao Guang into a pulp. Gao Guang dragged his broken body and fled back to Liangzhu city. He didn't even have the time to say his last words, and he didn't even have the chance to take a last glance at his clansmen. He died on the wasteland outside Liangzhu city with his pair of legs popping out. Wu Qi and the rest hurried back to Zhongzhou. Along the way, they encountered itinerant cultivators and immortals discussing this matter. They heard Gao Guang's background, where he died, and the various disturbances caused after his death. Wu Qi and the rest could not help but twitch their lips. Was it their bad luck, or was it Gao Guang's luck? He was such an important minister, such an extravagant man. Instead of enjoying his life in Liangzhu, he had to wander around and hit people behind their backs. With Gao Guang's death, the human emperor was furious, and Deyu had mobilized the whole nation. Countless soldiers who had returned to the countryside had put on their armor again and joined the war. It was true that Myriad Immortal Alliance had encountered a great trouble, but it was bound to become much more difficult for the people of the six dynasties to develop their own power. Originally, Deyu had reserved a lot of power, but with Gao Guang's death, it was likely that Deyu would go all out to kill the cultivators and immortals on Panga continent. They could only hope that Ing Zheng and the others would not be too unlucky to be discovered by the enraged army of Deyu. They did not want to be killed by Deyu's army as soon as they arrived on Panga continent, thinking that they were the vassals of Myriad Immortal Alliance. Because of the war between Deyu and Myriad Immortal Alliance, cultivators and immortals could not use the official teleportation formations of Deyu. Therefore, Yan Dan and the others could not let Princess Xianglu be kept in her interstitial world, as that would be too disrespectful to Yan Dan and the others. Therefore, Wu Qi and the others could only rely on their own escape arts to travel to Zhongzhou. Dian Immortal Pass was a long way from Zhongzhou, and even with Wu Qi's speed, it would take him 3 months to get there. As for Yan Dan and the others, their speed was not as fast as Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu, it would probably take them a longer time to get there. Along the way, they had witnessed dozens of battles where the Great Yu army encircled and annihilated immortals and itinerant cultivators. Every time, it was Wu Qi who protected them, allowing them to observe the fighting techniques of the Great Yu army up close. Yu Yi, Fan Yuqi, and the other military officers were dismissive of the Great Yu army's command and mobilization. They only felt that the Great Yu army's marching and fighting were extremely rigid. There was no strategy in the battles between the two sides, and it was a head-on fight. After witnessing the battles of the Great Yu army, and learning about Deyu's administration along the way, Yan Dan and the others were full of confidence that Great Yan could gain a foothold on Panga continent. In their opinion, the administration of Deyu was like a sieve, with countless loopholes that they could use at will. With the shrewdness and sophistication of Yan Dan and the others, they could do whatever they wanted in a country without a household registration management system or a strict monitoring system. Especially now that Deyu and Myriad Immortal Alliance were in a mess, it was perfectly normal for some provinces to have more or less people. Apart from Wu Qi's concern about Gao Guang's death, Yan Dan and the others had become ambitious. They were only waiting to arrive at Zhong province, where they could quickly use Anlu County and Anyi County as the base, supplemented by Wu Qi's East Sea County, to quickly expand their territory and invade Panga continent. But, when they were only half a month away from Zhong province, even Jing Ku, who was the most forthright and careless among them, began to notice that something was not right. The frequency of the Great Yu army's sightings was getting higher and higher. Previously, they could only see one army of Dayu every 2 or 3 days, but now, they could see 3 to 5 armies of Dayu flying across the sky in flying ships every day. Originally, strategic forces of Dayu like the Supreme Oracles rarely appeared in front of people. But now, there was a Supreme Tower shattering the void and appearing in all directions. After carefully scanning the surroundings with their powerful divine sense, they would suddenly shatter the void and go somewhere else. At the peak, Wu Qi and the others saw 7 different Supreme Towers appearing in the distant sky in one day. With the power of the sky-reaching tower that could shatter the void, the Supreme Priests didn't need to rest at all. They could go wherever they wanted. With 3 to 5 Supreme Oracles, the sky of dozens of first-grade provinces was covered with the shadows of Supreme Towers. This was not good news. The overall strength of these Supreme Oracles was so strong that nothing could deceive their eyes. Wu Qi shook his head. It looked like it was not going to be easy for the 6 dynasties to gain a foothold on Pangu continent. What made Wu Qi even more nervous was that both he and Princess Zhanglu had sensed the evil force that kept sweeping across Pangu continent in the void. Every time a wave of force swept across their bodies, Wu Qi's heart would twitch violently. Even Ao Buzan looked worried in the face of the invasion of this force, and he was no longer as lazy and arrogant as usual. It was a curse cast by an almighty expert from the Directorate of Celestials, looking for the suspect who killed Gao Qingguang. If Wu Qi had not used the chaotic energy to erase the remaining aura of the people of the 6 dynasties and erased some of the karmic ties between them and Gao Qingguang, they would have been found by the people from the Directorate of Celestials by now. Wu Qi could only hope that the emperors and courtiers of the other 5 dynasties could keep a low profile. In the face of the furious Dayu dynasty, Wu Qi and the others were still too weak. In the face of such an impenetrable search, a careless mistake could lead to disaster. Wu Qi could not help but fly into a rage out of humiliation. Wasn't it just Gao Qingguang? Did they have to be so nervous? What troubled Wu Qi even more happened. Just as they were about to enter Hai Province, the puppet Wu Qi had left in the East Sea City sent him a warning. Someone had sneaked into the East Sea City and attacked Wu Qi, who was seriously injured and unconscious. The evil flame in Wu Qi's belly exploded in an instant. Chapter 663. Together with the emperor and ministers of Great Yan, Wu Qi met up with the army led by Su Qin and Yan Bugui at the border of East Sea County. Su Qin and Yan Bugui breathed a sigh of relief at the same time when they saw Wu Qi return safely. Over the past few days, the celestial fiend puppet Wu Qi had left in East Sea County, disguised as him, had been attacked 9 times in a row. Poisonous gases, venomous bugs, assassins who sneaked into the bedroom, strange curses, and many other things had implicated and killed more than 3,000 soldiers of East Sea County. Fortunately, the puppet did not have a body of flesh and blood, and it did not have a soul to be attacked. Although the assassins had attacked it 9 times in a row, except for one attack that almost cut it into pieces, the other attacks were all neutralized by Su Qin and his men, who came to the scene after hearing the news. The puppet, which was almost cut into pieces, only swallowed a few hundred kilograms of copper and iron ingots, and its body had basically returned to normal. Su Qin had also brought the puppet over, and Wu Qi had put it back into his body. After a brief discussion with Su Qin and Yan Bugui about the current situation in East Sea County, Wu Qi bade farewell to the emperor and ministers of Great Yan. Princess Zhanglu would follow Yan Dan and the others to Anlu County and Ani County. Su Qin and Yan Bugui would hand over the control of the 2 counties to Great Yan's imperial court, and Princess Zhanglu would spend some time to gradually release the people of Great Yan from her interstitial world, letting them settle down in Anlu County and Ani County. The first batch of people to be released would certainly not be the entire population that Great Yan had brought to Pangu continent. At most, it would be several tens of thousands of people. Only when Great Yan had completely taken control of the 2 counties could all the people be gradually released to fill the 2 counties. Not only Great Yan, but also the people of the other 5 dynasties were still sleeping in Princess Zhongli's interstitial world. Apart from a large number of civil and military officials of the 5 dynasties who had been released, the members of the imperial clan were still sleeping in the interstitial world. For a long period of time in the future, Princess Zhanglu would be running around, gradually releasing the people from her interstitial world according to the requirements of the 6 nations. This was a very difficult thing to do, but for the sake of the 6-nation alliance, this was the only way. Gazing at Princess Zhanglu and the others who were leaving, Wu Qi turned to look at the dozens of scouting officers standing beside him and said in a flat tone, "Return to the East Sea County. Hey, those assassins caught them alive, but not a single one of them is willing to say who sent them." A scouting officer cupped his fist and bowed respectfully to Wu Qi, then shook his head helplessly. In the 9 assassination attempts, 7 to 8 of the assassins were captured alive, but all of their souls were tightly sealed with restrictive spells. He had once used a soul-searching technique to interrogate one of the assassins, but the result was that the assassin exploded and died on the spot, nearly dragging Su Qin into it. With a cold snort, Wu Qi turned to Lu Qingfeng and the others who had just been released by Princess Zhanglu, shook his head, and said, "Big brother, brothers, this is the current situation. We are all brothers of the same family, so let's cut to the chase. The affairs of East Sea City and even East Sea County must be handled quickly." Lu Qingfeng nodded, then cupped his fist and said to Wu Qi with a smile, "Of course. This is the foundation of us brothers, and we must take care of it wholeheartedly." Looking around at the vast and boundless wilderness, Lu Qingfeng breathed out a long sigh and said, "When you and I were in Little Meng City in the past, we never thought that we would have such an opportunity today. Ha ha ha, in such a vast world, we have a bright future ahead of us." At Wu Qi's order, the 100,000 iron-armored soldiers released by Princess Zhanglu from Qiqi's interstitial world let out a loud cry. Together, Wu Qi and Ao Buzan rolled up a gust of strong wind, and a dark cloud rose from the ground. The 100,000 elite soldiers, who had been trained by Lu Qingfeng, Zhang Hu, and the others over the years, rose into the air and flew toward East Sea City. These 100,000 soldiers were the elites that Great Yen had carefully trained over the years. Since Yen Bugui and the others sent the true body of heaven and earth scripture and other cultivation techniques of the human race back to Great Yen had recruited a large number of soldiers and began to cultivate the cultivation techniques of the human race. These 100,000 elite soldiers were the best of the best, and because they were trained by Lu Qingfeng and the others, there was absolutely no problem in their loyalty. Among these soldiers, the strongest could already fight against nascent soul cultivators, and the weakest could fight against Jin Dan cultivators. Although their cultivation bases were a little too weak on Panga continent, they were on Panga continent, and their cultivation bases would definitely grow very quickly. Especially when Wu Qi could exchange a large number of blood sacrifices with Lei Meng in exchange for power, he did not have to worry about the cultivation bases of these soldiers. With 100,000 Xiong Pai in hand, together with a group of capable officials brought by Lu Qingfeng and the others, Wu Qi's administrative, military, penal, and civil affairs framework of East Sea County was finally complete. As long as Wu Qi kept transferring resources to East Sea County, together with the hundreds of millions of Great Yen's people in Princess Zhang Li's reserve, the future development of East Sea County would surely reach a climax. With Ao Buzan, the freshly minted true dragon of gold immortal realm, a 10,000 miles long gust of wind blew the dark clouds and rushed toward East Sea City. After spending more than 20 hours on the road, the East Sea City came into sight. In the farmlands outside the city, countless farmers were meticulously tending to the crops in the fields. A gentle breeze blew across the fields, and waves of green waves reflected a little bit of green light under the sunlight. Far in the distance, thousands of white sails were gliding across the smooth surface of the ocean. Large trawls made by Su Qin were being pulled by fishing boats and scooped up a large number of fishes. When Wu Qi and his company were flying across the ocean, they happened to see a large fish being pulled up, and the joyful laughter of fishermen could be heard echoing across the ocean. Between the plains and the sea, on the mountains that surrounded the East Sea City like arms, some herb gatherers and hunters were roaming in the woods. Occasionally, a powerful wild beast would pounce on them and attack them. The well-trained soldiers of Donghai City would raise their iron shields and spears and charge forward. These beasts that ordinary people couldn't deal with were killed on the spot. These beasts already had the aura of demonic beasts, but they still possessed the aura of demonic beasts. Controlling the dark clouds, Ao Buzan circled the East Sea city a few times. Lu Qingfeng and the others could not help but laugh happily as they looked down at the lively cities and villages below. This was a good place, 100% good place. Everything was so pleasing to the eye, and everything made one feel comfortable. Even the wind blowing from the surface of the sea, which carried the fishy smell of the sea, was full of vitality and abundant energy. Everything here had a primitive and simple feeling, just like a piece of unpolished jade, waiting for Lu Qingfeng and his companions to study and carve it. Seeing the satisfied smile on Lu Qingfeng and the others' faces, Wu Qi nodded delightedly as well. Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other immortals who had submitted to Wu Qi, who had been silent all this while, finally smiled. There was no need to deliberately search for energy veins or caves, and no need to build a cave abode. Any place on Pangu continent had more natural energy than Myriad Immortals' planet. This was a good place for cultivation, a real blessed land. It was hard to imagine how rich the natural energy would be if they could find a good cave abode here, and communicate with a few underground energy veins to attract natural energy. Wu Qi scanned the mountains in the distance with his divine sense, and found that the mountains were filled with powerful energy ripples. Clearly, they were filled with all kinds of spirit herbs. When he looked at the mountains in the distance with his Dharma eyes, he saw 5 colored beams of light shooting up into the sky from under the sand. He could tell that the reserves of various ores in the mountains were extremely rich, thousands, even tens of thousands of times richer than Myriad Immortals' planet. Pangu continent is indeed a good place. Patriarch Jiang Yun stroked his beard and smiled, while Daoist Qing Xin and the others kept nodding and praising. All of them were taking deep breaths and laughing happily. The disciples of White Cloud Immortals sect and Tranquil Vimla sect were smiling brightly as well. Some of the disciples with lower seniority and cultivation base were so dizzy that they could barely stand straight. The concentration of natural energy here was so strong that they were intoxicated by it. Smiling, Wu Qi said to Patriarch Jiang Yun, "Patriarch, let's settle down the army of 100,000 soldiers first. After that, I'll accompany the few patriarchs to choose a blessed land to build a cave abode. The few patriarchs are the revered elders of Underhand sect, and I'll have to rely on them for many things in the future." Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other old immortals nodded happily, while the disciples of both sects were overjoyed. They had encountered a really good thing this time. After 2 days of busy work, Wu Qi finally settled down the people he brought with him. 100,000 soldiers were stationed in 4 camps in the East Sea city, each under the command of Meng Xiaobai, Luo Kadi, and a few others. Lu Qingfeng became the highest administrative officer in East Sea County, apart from Wu Qi and Princess Zhangluo. He had the final say in all the affairs of the military court, Directorate of Celestials, Agriculture Court, Priest Court, and many other institutions. Lu Ziyuan and a large number of Lu Qingfeng's trusted subordinates had filled all the departments in East Sea County, and the administrative efficiency of East Sea County was immediately raised by more than 100 times. Meanwhile, Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other 2 ancestral masters and their disciples had built a cave abode in a smoky mountain about 10,000 miles west of East Sea City. 1,000 boys with excellent spirit roots and aptitudes were carefully selected from all over the East Sea County by Wu Qi. The abundant natural energy, endless cultivation resources, and the large number of new disciples had made Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others overjoyed, making them dance with joy. Waiting Dragon King, who had left Myriad Immortals' planet with Wu Qi, was delighted to meet his son here. Together with a few old dragon kings and many aquatic demons, as well as Lord Xiansheng, Catfish Flood Dragon, and many others, they had built a city in the ocean near East Sea County, preparing to build a magnificent crystal palace. Driven by his wicked sense of humor, Wu Qi had named the Crystal Palace, the Dragon Palace of East Sea. Driven by Wu Qi's wicked sense of humor, Waining Dragon King had changed his name to Ao Guang, the Dragon King of East Sea. Finally, after arranging the people of Meng village to stay in the most fertile valley outside East Sea City, Wu Qi finally had the time to visit the few assassins who were captured alive in the dungeon of the city. In a dark and damp dungeon, on top of a cross made of black stone, a few skinny, fierce-looking men were chained to the cross, naked. They were the unlucky men who had tried to assassinate Wu Qi 9 times in a row, but failed in the end. But, they did not know that what they were trying to assassinate was not Wu Qi himself, but the celestial fiend puppets Wu Qi had left in East Sea County. Slowly, Wu Qi came before these assassins, frowning as he studied their naked bodies. "Tell me, who asked you to assassinate me?" Wu Qi was a little angry as he cried out, "You should know that I've always been seriously wounded, lying in bed and unable to move. Yet, you still want to assassinate me? Who has such a deep grudge against me?" The few assassins turned to look at Wu Qi. A mysterious smile appeared on their faces, and suddenly, their bodies began to swell up. Boom! Boom! A few loud booms rang out, and the dungeon, which occupied an area of nearly 100 acres, collapsed. Chapter 664. Without giving Wu Qi any chance to ask questions, the few assassins immediately detonated their fleshly bodies the moment they saw Wu Qi. Their souls turned into countless wisps of dark green smoke that could be seen with naked eyes and shot out in all directions, interweaving into a huge net that enveloped Wu Qi and the others. Vaguely, shrill and unpleasant ghost howls could be heard coming out of the net. No one knew how many evil ghosts the attack had attracted. The 100-acre dungeon collapsed. Wu Qi pointed his fingers in the air and produced primordial runes that flowed like water, which transformed into a pitch-black, bell-shaped restrictive barrier that protected everyone from the terrible explosion. When the shockwaves of the explosion gradually subsided, he brought everyone out of the ground. The dungeon, which was originally deep underground, had turned into a huge pit that measured about 100 acres in circumference and hundreds of feet deep. The bodies of these assassins exploded, and their blood and flesh melted into a sticky stream of venom. Even the rocks and soil on the ground were corroded by the venom and turned into smoke, slowly rising into the air. That sizzling noise sounded like countless silkworms swallowing leaves, which could make anyone's hair stand straight up. "Ha, men of death!" Wu Qi flew back to the ground with everyone. Gritting his teeth, he stared at the completely destroyed dungeon, then waved his hand and ordered Huang Liang to summon the civil servants to backfill the pit. Before that, he also needed to get some antidotes from the Directorate of Celestials and sprinkle them into the pit to neutralize the poison. Needless to say, who else but Yu Miao could have such a deep grudge against Wu Qi that he would send assassins of death and use such a vicious method to kill Wu Qi? Wu Qi had been involved in the power struggle between the Yu clan of Zhong Province and the Yu clan of Liangzhu. Although he was just an insignificant character in this matter, how could Yu Miao, who felt that he had lost face and been thrown into confusion, let go of Wu Qi? This assassination might just be the vanguard of the countless assassinations that would follow. With the viciousness and cruelty of Yu Miao's curses, and the fact that the venom from the bodies of these assassins contained some other evil tricks, it was very likely that this piece of land could no longer be used in the future. Wu Qi's intuition told him that the venom would turn this piece of land into a land of death. It might not be a barren land, but he could not expect this piece of land to be rich in water, grass, and livestock in the future. Men of sacrifice. Lu Qingfeng laughed eerily. "So, there are people on Panga continent who raise men of sacrifice? Hee, I really want to see who is stronger between their men of sacrifice and the assassins of Great Yen." Wu Qi's eyes lit up. He thought of the assassins he and Lu Qingfeng had met in Great Yen, who had no fear of death, who did not care about their own lives or the lives of others, and who were cruel, evil, cunning, and ferocious. Wu Qi immediately assigned the task to Lu Qingfeng, asking him to contact Princess Zhanglu as soon as possible, asking Princess Zhanglu to provide some feasible and vicious methods, and asking Lu Qingfeng to select a batch of assassins immediately. Assassinations? Wu Qi could not help but grin coldly. How many sons and grandsons do you have who can withstand the endless assassins sent by Wu Qi? If you want to play, I'll play with you. Wu Qi clenched his jaw and made up his mind. While the East Sea City was dealing with the trouble caused by the desperate assassins, a few guards from the county governor mansion arrived in a hurry. The prefecture overseer of Hai Province, Yu Miao, had arrived at the county governor mansion of East Sea with a group of attendants, and had asked to see Wu Qi. The person who brought the guards to see Wu Qi was Yan Feiyu, a minor civil servant brought by Lu Qingfeng. These civil servants trained by Lu Qingfeng were very perceptive. Yan Feiyu told Wu Qi respectfully that Yu Miao's face was unsightly, and that there were a few middle-aged men around him who seemed to be very rude to Yu Miao. It seemed that Yu Miao was being suppressed by them. As the supervisor of the county governor mansion, Yan Feiyu was responsible for greeting visitors, serving tea, guarding the door, and arranging guards. Just now, he had taken the opportunity of asking the maidservants to serve tea to observe the relationship between Yu Miao and the few middle-aged men. When Yu Miao asked about Wu Qi's current situation, he seemed very concerned, and even a little worried. But, the tones of the few middle-aged men were unpleasant. Judging from their gloating tone, it seemed that they could not wait for Wu Qi to die as soon as possible. Before one wave had subsided, another wave had arisen. Wu Qi sneered and nodded at Lu Qingfeng. Lu Qingfeng then left to deal with the various affairs in East Sea City, while Wu Qi brought hundreds of guards who practiced the true body of heaven and earth scripture and rode a tall horse to the county governor mansion. In Yu's usual style, a snake-shaped flying ship and a scorpion-shaped flying ship were hovering side by side over the county governor mansion, about 3 miles above the ground. The snake-shaped flying ship was Yu Miao's ride, so Wu Qi was naturally familiar with it. But, the flying ship, which looked like a scorpion with 4 wings on its back, gave off a ghastly evil air. The black scorpion-shaped flying ship was covered with a layer of unknown scales, which should have been removed from some kind of serpent. The head of the ship was round, and there was a faint green gleam flickering in the scorpion-shaped mouthpiece, which should be the nozzle of some powerful weapon. On the other hand, a barb shaped like a scorpion's tail was poking out from the back of the ship. It was about 10 feet in diameter and glinted with a pale green gleam, while several dozens of bizarre runes could be vaguely seen flashing on its sharp tip. Even from such a long distance, Wu Qi could smell the fishy smell coming out from the tip. Calmly scanning the ship with his divine will, Wu Qi was shocked to find that the flying ship was actually made from the shell of a giant scorpion, about 3 miles long. According to the Scroll of Stealing, there was only one kind of giant scorpion, the green-tailed scarlet heart scorpion. It was a vicious creature whose venom could destroy the soul of even a gold immortal. In other words, this scorpion could fight against a gold immortal, and one could easily imagine the cost of making it into a flying ship. Compared to this flying ship, Yu Miao's snake-shaped flying ship was like a shabby 3-wheeled motorcycle parked next to a luxury limousine. Without batting an eyelid, Wu Qi dismounted in front of the county governor's mansion and walked into the mansion with a large group of guards. In the main hall of the mansion, Yu He, with a gloomy face, was staring blankly with a teacup in his hand. The tea had cooled, but he did not move at all. A few other middle-aged men dressed in coarse black robes were sitting on the large stone chairs in the main hall, leisurely tasting the tea that had been brewed into plain water. Standing next to Yu He were 6 moon oracles, and the sleeves of the few middle-aged men were embroidered with at least 7 crescent moons, while the dozen or so oracles standing behind them had more than 4 crescent moons embroidered on their sleeves. Obviously, the leader of the group was a middle-aged man who wore 3 dark green jade rings on his fingers. He had a square face, and his skin was fair like the finest jade. 9 crescent moons were embroidered on his sleeves, and they were all embroidered with golden threads. Clearly, he was a formidable expert who could break through the realm of sun and step into the realm of gold immortal at any time. The sound of footsteps rang out as Wu Qi walked slowly into the hall. He left all the guards outside the hall, and walked into the hall with a calm and composed expression. Smiling and bowing to Yu He, Wu Qi said slowly, "Elder brother Yu Miao, I am in the middle of a war with Myriad Immortal Alliance. How did you find the time to come here? Tan Lang is useless. He was wounded by a few fiend immortals last time. After recuperating for so long, he has just fully recovered." When Yu He saw Wu Qi come in, he quickly put down his teacup and bowed to Wu Qi. When he heard Wu Qi say that he had fully recovered, he could not hide the joy that had welled up in his heart. Before he could say anything, he burst out laughing. He came up to Wu Qi excitedly, took Wu Qi's hand, and said, "Wonderful. Have you really recovered?" I've been so busy these past few months that I didn't have time to visit you in East Sea County. Have you really recovered? Grinning coldly, Wu Qi gave the few middle-aged men a sidelong glance and said coolly, "Of course I've recovered. Otherwise, why would there be assassins coming to me? A while ago, I had just devoured the hundreds of millions of evil spirits that rushed into my head, and just as my overall strength had taken a big step forward, some assassins came knocking on my door. What a pity. I've captured them alive, and they even said that Elder Yu Miao sent them to kill me." As soon as Wu Qi said that, Yu Miao's face froze abruptly. The middle-aged man with a dignified appearance raised his brows, rose to his feet slowly, and said with a cold grin, "Tan Lang, don't talk nonsense. You can't implicate my father in such groundless things." The corner of Wu Qi's mouth twitched as he raised his chin at the man and asked coolly, "Who is this?" Yu Miao grinned darkly, clasping his hands behind his back as he looked at the man and said, "Elder Yu Miao's son, my uncle, Yu Lei. I'm here because someone complained to Prefecture Overseer Bo, saying that our Yu clan has placed a cripple, who is seriously injured and has his soul devoured, as the lord of a county, which occupies more than 30% of the land in Hai Province." "He, Elder Yu Miao sent Uncle Yu Lei here." Wu Qi nodded as if he was suddenly enlightened. "If I'm still seriously injured, or if I've been killed by the assassins, His Excellency Yu Lei will become the new county governor of East Sea, right? What a pity. I was able to get out of bed 2 months ago, and I've been feeling better these days. Those assassins have also confessed that Elder Yu Miao sent them to kill me. What should I do now?" He scolded hypocritically, "Tan Lang, Elder Yu Miao sent someone to assassinate you, but he needs evidence." Wu Qi grinned and clasped his hands behind his back, not saying a word. Yu Lei's expression flickered slightly. Looking at Wu Qi, who was alive and kicking without any sign of injury, he shook his head thoughtfully. After sizing up Wu Qi for a long time, He smiled faintly and said, "Well, since General Tan Lang is safe and sound, it's easy to get back to Prefecture Overseer. General Tan Lang is in good health, so I'm sure he can take good care of East Sea County." As he spoke, Yu Lei suddenly stretched out his right hand and thrust it toward Wu Qi like the poisonous tail of a scorpion. A shrill whistle rang out as a beam of green light shot straight toward Wu Qi's forehead. Wu Qi gave a cold snort as a plume of black mist sprayed out of his body, amidst which could be vaguely seen flashing with bolts of lightning. Without hesitation, he performed an incantation gesture, and 13 bolts of lightning, each as thick as a bowl, shot whistling out of the mist in a row, shattering the green light and heading straight toward Yu Miao's face. Yu Lei laughed and a large amount of green mist with a fishy stench surged out from his body, dispersing the lightning. After that, he led the large group of attendants around him and left without saying a word. In the blink of an eye, he had walked out of the hall. They flew up and entered the scorpion-shaped flying boat. Not long after, the flying boat disappeared without a trace. After a full quarter of an hour, a faint cold snort was heard coming from the horizon. "Cultivating both fleshly body and magic? You do live up to your reputation. Tan Lang. Yu Lei, will remember you." Chapter 665. On the golden sand, the sound of drumming could be heard. A large group of strong and handsome girls danced merrily on the beach, their bodies red against the bonfire, making them look like flaming fairies who had descended to the mortal world. Whole cows, sheep, little whales, and skewers of chickens, ducks, and geese were being roasted over the bonfire, their bodies dripping with oil. A strong aroma drifted far away with the sea breeze, and the sound of laughter drowned out the sound of the tide. A curtain measuring 1,000 feet in both length and width was formed by black brocade, and Wu Qi and Yu He were sitting behind it with their attendants, drinking and having fun. Wu Qi's attendants and personal guards were all burly men, each of them had a burly body, and each of them was a tough man who could overturn a mountain with just one punch. As for Yu He's attendants, more than 90% of them were skinny oracles who looked like they could be blown away by a gust of wind. The oracles brought here by Yu He now had pale faces, and were racking their brains to think of a way to avoid the toasts of these burly men around Wu Qi. Some of the rough-looking men, such as the few hunters from Meng village, had already pinned a few oracles to the ground, forcing their mouths open and pouring wine into their mouths with wine jars. The few poor moon oracles, who could fight against heaven immortals, were like little chicks being beaten by a rainstorm before the violence of these burly men. They could not fight back at all, and were almost killed by the strong liquor they poured into their bodies. When these oracles were knocked out, the dancing girls rushed up and carried them to a small tent next to the curtain. Before long, the moans and gasps of girls could be heard. Wu Qi and Yu He looked at each other and grinned. The obscenity in their eyes made one wish that a bolt of lightning would fall from the sky and strike them to death. Yu He was very satisfied with Wu Qi's hospitality. In his opinion, Wu Qi's arrangements were very thoughtful. The one-stop service of eating, drinking, and having fun was too warm. The wine and delicacies served were the best, and the men who served them were very enthusiastic. Although they were a little too enthusiastic, the dancing girls were really young and lovely. Even Yu Mu himself had taken a fancy to a few girls with very long legs and fair skin. He was already a little restless. If it weren't for Wu Qi urging him to drink, he would have already rushed up to those girls. On the other hand, Wu Qi was very satisfied with the human race that Yu Miao had sent to him. Unlike the warriors who cultivated the true body of heaven and earth scripture, the priests of Deyu were a scarce resource. Although the armies of Zhong province were usually accompanied by tens of thousands of oracles when they went to war, the number of official oracles in the entire Directorate of Celestials of Zhong province, including the Directorate of Celestials of the 300 provinces under its jurisdiction, did not exceed 500,000 people, excluding those apprentice oracles, who could have the patterns of stars, moon, and sun tattooed on their sleeves. Moreover, priestesses were different from ordinary warriors. Those warriors would retire once they reached the age limit, but priestesses were a lifelong profession. The total number of retired veterans and serving soldiers in Zhong province was definitely over 10 million, but there were only a little over 500,000 priestesses in the entire province. Pangu continent was not short of warriors. As long as they were men with a strong body and full of blood and energy, they were all good candidates for cultivating the true body of heaven and earth scripture. But what the oracles of Directorate of Celestials needed was not a strong body, but an innate power that allowed them to communicate with ghosts and gods. And this innate power was mostly inherited in the bloodline, just like the power of the ancient god that Princess Zhang Lu inherited from her mother. If Wu Qi wanted to make a living on Pangu continent, how could there be no oracles in his East Sea County? But now, the oracles of Directorate of Celestials in East Sea County were the 2 or 3 cats assigned to him by Yu Miao, and they were all the direct descendants of Yu clan, so there was no way they would be loyal to Wu Qi. Therefore, taking the opportunity of Yu Miao bringing a large number of oracles to East Sea County, Wu Qi shamelessly recruited beautiful girls to borrow his seed. Yu Miao had brought hundreds of oracles with him, and Wu Qi had recruited 8,000 beautiful girls from the common people with a huge sum of money. And, according to Wu Qi's knowledge of physiology and hygiene, these girls were all pregnant in the past 2 days, and once they intercourse with a man, they were likely to get pregnant. The clothes of the dancing girls were specially designed by Wu Qi, short hot pants and short shirts that barely covered their breasts, exposing large areas of their fair skin. Coupled with the stimulation of the bonfire and liquor, they would definitely turn Yu Miao and those oracles from sanctimonious oracles into beasts in heat worse than beasts. There were only hundreds of girls dancing around the bonfire, but in the woods near the curtain, there were thousands more waiting to have sex with these oracles. Wu Qi promised these girls that as long as their children had the aptitude to become oracles, these girls and their families would be supported by East Sea County, and their children would become lofty oracles. Wu Qi had underestimated the people of Pangu continent's yearning for the mysterious, powerful, noble, and dignified profession of oracles. The 8,000 girls were all recruited without any effort, and under Wu Qi's strategy, they would squeeze Yu Miao and the hundreds of oracles dry. Wu Qi was very satisfied with the brilliant idea he had come up with, and he was even more satisfied with Lu Qingfeng's efficiency. Yu Miao and the others arrived in East Sea County at noon, but by dusk, the 8,000 girls were already ready, and all the preparations for the bonfire party were ready. They had even added some herbal juice to the liquor, which was suitable for aphrodisiac and could squeeze out the energy of men. 2 hours later, all the oracles Yu Miao brought with him had disappeared, and the sound of banging and moaning could be heard coming from the small tents near the curtain. After being pulled up by the ear by Wu Qi and forced down 2 jars of liquor, Yu Miao was escorted into one of the tents by more than 20 girls in a daze. With a faint smile on his face, Wu Qi stood in the middle of the curtain and quietly cast a strange magic, the hasten spell. It was a mystic magic that the ancient clans cast when they were having sex in order to multiply their population. It was invented by some bored innate gods in ancient times, and its only effect was to enhance the libido of men and increase the chance of pregnancy of women. A faint pink mist enveloped the whole beach, and the strange noises coming from the tents suddenly became very loud. The 8,000 carefully selected girls were all in their menstrual period, and coupled with the effect of the hemorrhagic curse, Wu Qi had no doubt that in a few months, Donghai County would have 8,000 pregnant women with big bellies. In a few years, the East Sea County would have at least thousands of children who had the aptitude to become oracles. If they were brainwashed and educated from an early age, and carefully trained by Princess Xianglu, an expert who was proficient in the great Tao of ancient gods, East Sea County would no longer have to worry about the lack of oracles. Chickens give birth to eggs, and eggs give birth to chickens. Chickens, eggs, and eggs are endless. Standing with his hands clasped behind his back and listening to the subtle noises coming from the small tents, Wu Qi breathed a deep sigh and said, "It's not easy for me to run a territory. Pimping 8,000 people at once? I dare not say it will never happen again since ancient times, but it is an unprecedented feat." Shaking his head, Wu Qi gave a cold snort. If not for the lack of population in his territory, Wu Qi could really get tens of thousands of people to plant his seeds. If not for the fear that he would not be able to explain to Yu Miao if he killed some of them, Wu Qi would also get hundreds of women from the Longbow Kingdom, whom he had placed in a secret ancient cave to recuperate. Unfortunately, the bodies of these oracles were as fragile as reeds. If those women from Longbow Kingdom were to get excited and accidentally use a little bit of strength, they might really lose their lives. Sighing with emotion, Wu Qi stood in the tent from the wee hours of the morning, then noon, and afternoon. It was not until the evening of the next day that Yu Miao finally staggered out of the tent with the help of a few girls. Yu Miao, who was once handsome and elegant, now had his face turned blue, and his eye sockets were pitch black, making him look like a panda. His back was hunched and his body trembled as he walked out of the tent. His lips were sunken, and he looked as if he had lost a lot of weight. Before long, the curtains of the tents were lifted, and all the oracles had to be supported by the girls to get out. These poor oracles were very weak to begin with, and after 12 to 14 hours of hard work, they felt as if their brains and other bodily fluids had been completely squeezed dry. "What a passionate man. He said to Wu Qi with a trembling voice, "Brother, I'm leaving now. You are too passionate, and they are too passionate. If I don't leave now, I'm afraid I won't be able to. Why, you must be careful of that old bastard, Yu Miao. He is not a man who is easy to talk to." After giving Wu Qi a few words of advice, Yu Miao swallowed and glanced greedily at the girls around him, who were staggering as well. Suddenly, he shuddered. Not daring to look at these beautiful girls any longer, he gritted his teeth and said, "Last night was really absurd. Brother, the girls in your territory are really too passionate. Fortunately, I still have some foundation, or else I wouldn't be able to stand up today." The oracles brought here by Yu Miao were also looking at the girls around them with complicated expressions. Last night, they had experienced the feeling of going straight from heaven to hell. At first, they were so happy that they felt like they were in heaven, but in the end, the feeling of having their bones scraped and their marrow sucked made them feel like they were in hell. But, hell was so depressing that they had lost their minds and gone crazy. They did whatever the girls wanted, and even took the initiative to invade and violate. The legs of these oracles were weak, and they had no strength at all. But, as Yu Miao had said, Wu Qi was too passionate, and the girls in his territory were too passionate. The bewildering scene of 8,000 girls attacking about 600 oracles had left these oracles with blank memories, and they could not remember what had happened from last night to now. But, it was so enjoyable that they felt like they were flying into the clouds. General Tan Lang, the county governor of East Sea, is such a good man. Yu Mu, as well as the oracles he brought here, were all filled with deep gratitude to Wu Qi, but they could not help but be traumatized by the girls in his territory. It was so terrible that many of them almost died last night. Naturally, Wu Qi was reluctant to part with Yu Miao. He packed half of the local specialties of the flying ship for Yu Miao, picked a few beautiful girls, and sent them to the ship. Only then did he wave goodbye to Yu Miao. Wu Qi promised that when he straightened out the backlog of affairs in East Sea County, he would immediately lead an army to fight against the people of Myriad Immortal Alliance. At the same time, he reminded Yu Miao to be careful of Yu Miao's sneak attack. After a long time of busying himself and seeing Yu Miao and his companions off, Wu Qi's face suddenly darkened. He immediately returned to the county governor's mansion and summoned all the high-ranking officials around him. He wanted to retaliate against Yu Miao, with the cruelest means. Chapter 666. The only thing Wu Qi discussed in the meeting with Lu Qingfeng and others was how to retaliate against Yu Miao. How many times had Yu Miao tried to kill Wu Qi by sending assassins to kill Wu Qi? Coupled with the palm strike Yu Miao had given Wu Qi when he first came to Panga continent, Yu Miao had tried to kill Wu Qi several times. On several occasions, Wu Qi had been forced into a desperate situation by Yu Miao, and this time, it was Yu Miao who sent assassins to kill Wu Qi while he was seriously injured. The public news was that Wu Qi was seriously injured, but everyone knew that East Sea County was a private territory that Yu Miao had enfeoffed to Wu Qi after he had helped Wu Qi seize the power of the prefecture overseer of Hai Province. Wu Qi was seriously injured, and it was very likely that his soul had been devoured by an evil spirit, never to wake up again. Under such circumstances, Yu Miao did not take any action against East Sea County. Instead, it was Yu Miao who could not wait to strike. It was less than a year since Wu Qi went back and forth between outer heavenly realms. Yu Miao had probably sent someone to inquire about Wu Qi's injury, and found that Wu Qi was indeed bedridden because his soul was seriously injured, leaving only a few subordinates to take care of the affairs of East Sea County. After that, Yu Miao immediately sent assassins to kill Wu Qi, and at the same time sent his son, Yu Lei, to seize control of East Sea County. Yesterday, Yu Miao accompanied Yu Lei to East Sea County. According to Yan Feiyu's investigation and Yu Miao's own account, it was clear that Yu Lei had used Yu Miao's power to force Yu Miao to come to East Sea County and seize control of East Sea County for him. According to the laws of Diyu, for a newly enfeoffed governor like Wu Qi, if he didn't have any relatives or descendants, which meant he didn't have an heir, and if Wu Qi's soul was seriously injured and might not be able to recover, his direct superior must send a competent official to handle the affairs of the territory. Yu Mu had given Wu Qi a lot of face. Although Wu Qi was seriously wounded and bedridden, Yu Mu paid no attention to the affairs of East Sea County, as if he did not know that Wu Qi had violated Diyu's law. Wu Qi would never forget this friendship. Although Yu Miao had the bad habits of a young master from an influential clan, he was a man of loyalty. But, Yu Miao and Yu Lei's table manners were too unsightly, which made Wu Qi even angrier. By any means, we have to give Yu Miao a warning. Wu Qi explained the cause and effect of the matter to Lu Qingfeng, and then gave him the order. Lu Qingfeng did not waste any time. He immediately ordered a group of trusted subordinates to make the arrangements. With the manpower and resources Lu Qingfeng had at his disposal now, it was impossible for him to kill a great oracle like Yu Miao, who possessed an overall strength equal to that of a gold immortal. But, if it was only for Yu Miao's sons and grandsons, those who were related to Yu Miao, and the shops run by Yu Miao's people, Lu Qingfeng would be able to handle it perfectly. Great Yan had always cultivated assassins, and with his identity as Duke Yanlu of Great Yan, together with the rich profits brought to him by Star-Picking City and Little Meng City, Lu Qingfeng had raised nearly 10,000 men of sacrifice over the past few years. These men of sacrifice had followed Wu Qi to Panga continent, and were now training in a secret valley outside East Sea City. With the help of all kinds of vicious curses, deadly immortal talismans, and powerful weapons from Mo sect. These thorns would make Yu Miao's heart bleed over and over again like thorns. When Yu Miao and those elders around him were almost weakened, it would be time for Wu Qi to teach Yu Miao a hard lesson. East Sea County had begun its operation. Teams of assassins were sent out after Wu Qi had cast all kinds of vicious curses on their souls. A large number of intelligence agents swarmed out, infiltrating Zhong province and the 300 provinces under its jurisdiction. Lu Qingfeng, Lu Ziyuan, and others had very strong administrative ability and efficiency. Under their deployment, in just a few days, East Sea County had established a preliminary framework of highly efficient intelligence and assassination departments. When Wu Qi was severely wounded by the primordial gold talisman, when he was traveling across Panga continent on foot, he had created many celestial fiend puppets and sent them to various places to develop his own forces. On top of that, he had also rescued tens of thousands of cultivators from the mine of Miaoying Palace in the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. Those cultivators were controlled by him with a restrictive spell, and he had assigned them to his puppets, who had built up various forces of various sizes in various places. Even when Diyu was wiping out the itinerant cultivators of Myriad Immortal Alliance, these puppets had done a good job. They were lurking in all the cities and towns in Diyu, spreading their networks in all directions like spiders. With the help of the forces and networks established by these puppets, the intelligence agents sent by East Sea County soon infiltrated every aspect of Zhong province. 7 days later, Wu Qi received the first report of an assassin. 3 assassins had openly attacked Yu Miao's great-grandson and great-granddaughter on the street of Zhongning City. 2 of them were killed on the spot, and the dozen guards accompanying them were killed by the self-detonation of the assassins. 2 moon oracles of Yu Clan, who had rushed to the rescue after hearing the news, were also severely wounded by a powerful immortal talisman made by Sun Kuang at a close distance by a hidden assassin. One of them had lost an arm, and the other a leg. The hidden assassin had also self-detonated before he could be captured alive. Over the next 3 days, news of the battle kept coming. In just 3 to 4 days, 3 sons and 1 daughter, 5 grandsons and 7 granddaughters, 13 great-grandsons, and 21 great-granddaughters of Yu Miao's huge group of descendants were assassinated. A total of 107 shops owned by Yu Miao and his descendants were attacked at the same time. All the shopkeepers and workers were killed, and all their assets were looted. The families and properties of the Yu clan elders who were related to Yu Miao had also been attacked, and the success rate had reached a terrifying 100%. The sudden blow made all the members of Yu clan feel dizzy. Yu clan had never encountered such a blow, which was as swift and violent as a thunderbolt, as bizarre as the corrosion of a ghost, and as vicious and merciless as it was. It must be admitted that although the history of Diyu dynasty was much longer than that of Great Yan, when it came to the use of assassins, the members of Great Yan's imperial clan were definitely the patriarchs of all the influential figures in Diyu, including the human emperor. From the formulation of the operation plan, from the selection of targets to the timing of the attack, and the coordination of the assassins sent by Yu Miao were like thugs on the street, while the assassins sent by Lu Qingfeng were professional masters. And that was because the cultivation base of these assassins was too weak, so they could only target the ordinary people among Yu Miao's descendants who did not have any cultivation base. When the members of these assassins who practiced the true body of heaven and earth scripture and the other cultivation techniques of the human race spent a few years improving their cultivation base, these assassins would turn from ordinary wooden thorns and iron thorns into poisonous fangs, giving Yu Miao a heart-wrenching pain with just one strike. Wu Qi could not help but keep nodding as he enjoyed the summary of the results of the operation brought back by the intelligence agents. Lu Qingfeng had ordered all the assassins to suspend all operations. He had to give Yu Miao some buffer time, so that he, who had raised his guard, could gradually relax. Yu clan was now on high alert, and a large number of experts were protecting all the members of their direct line of descent. It was no longer as easy as it was a few days ago. Let Yu Miao and the others suffer in pain and anger, and when I have the chance, I'll give Yu Miao a few hard blows. This is revenge, Wu Qi's revenge on Yu Miao. He had to do it slowly and patiently. These assassins were a group of extremely patient killing machines, and as their master, he had to be more patient than them. Yu Miao is crying, isn't he? Wu Qi sneered. With a flip of his palm, all the reports turned into wisps of smoke. Pass down my order, assemble 10,000 soldiers and follow me to the battlefield. Wu Qi burst into laughter and cried out, Huang Liang, assemble 10,000 soldiers and select 10,000 of our new soldiers with the strongest cultivation base. Assemble the army and follow me to join the war with General Bo Yunting. The people of the 6 dynasties had been brought to Panga continent by Wu Qi, and they were now lying dormant in the wilderness, slowly accumulating their strength. Wu Qi, on the other hand, wanted to work hard for himself and those around him. He wanted to seize as many military exploits as he could, so that his military rank could continue to rise, and he could grasp more and more power and resources in Great Yen, a behemoth. When he rose one step, the people around him could rise one step, and the 6 dynasties could rise one step as well. And when the 6 dynasties rose one step, the people around him could rise one step, and he could rise another step as well. Wu Qi was not as ambitious as Ing Zheng and the other emperors. He was not interested in the positions of the great celestial emperors of the celestial court. He just wanted to control his own life and death, to avenge the favors he owed, to avenge Lady Dark Goldwater, Reverend Gale, and to avenge Wu Wang and Lu Xiaobai. But, when he thought about the enemies Wu Qi would have to deal with in the future, Green City was not a problem, for it was just a lackey sent by the celestial court. But, the revenge of Reverend Gale would be a big problem. If the mighty Eastern Green Emperor wanted to avenge him, perhaps Wu Qi would have to have the power and status of the great emperor of the celestial court. With all kinds of messy thoughts in his mind, Wu Qi was about to urge Huang Liang to prepare the army for war when a long and drawn-out Buddhist chant suddenly came from outside the city. In just a blink of an eye, it had spread across the entire territory of East Sea County. The Buddha is merciful, all living beings are suffering. When can they be freed from the tumultuous mortal world? When can they transcend the pain of transmigration? When can they join the Buddhist League? They will be blessed with boundless peace and joy. All living beings can enjoy great purity, great freedom, great joy, and great happiness. The Buddha is merciful. Benefactors, can you stop for a moment and listen to a scripture of transcendence from me? Wu Qi was taken aback. Suddenly, he sprung to his feet and cursed angrily. When he met Madman Shui the other day, the agreement they reached was very clear. Those bald monks were not allowed to enter East Sea County, or even Hai Province. Madman Shui had agreed to it at that time, but what was going on with those monks outside the city? Before one wave had subsided, another wave had arisen. The matter with Yu Miao was still entangled, and now there was trouble here. Wu Qi was really angry from the bottom of his heart. Chapter 667. Damn bald donkey who did not keep his promise. Damn Lao Ai. How could he not teach his own disciple well? Or perhaps, Lao Ai had lost his mind, and was relying on the fact that Patriarch Miao Xian was backing him, so he had the guts to do something else. Countless thoughts were tumbling in Wu Qi's mind. With a gloomy face and a strong killing intent, he rushed out of the county governor mansion. 12 large flying ships purchased by East Sea County at a high price soared into the sky, each carrying 1,000 fully armed soldiers. Even the dozens of oracles from the East Sea County's Directorate of Celestials had boarded the ships. Surrounded by a chilly wind and shrouded in a dark cloud, Wu Qi sped toward the direction where the chanting came from. Right on the east side of East Sea County, on a small cliff about tens of miles into the ocean, a monk with a fat head, big ears, and fair skin that looked like solidified lard could be seen. His lips were rosy like those of a teenage girl, and his eyes shone like pearls. His long earlobes drooped down to his waist, and his chest was exposed. He was clad in a pair of yellow monk pants, a monk robe, and a pair of straw sandals weaved from long green grass. A wooden fish, about 3 feet in circumference and cast from pure gold, was placed right next to him. The monk was holding a wooden fish hammer, which was as thick as a fist, and was striking the wooden fish from time to time. The wooden fish hammer was forged with pure silver, and when it was struck, it would send sparks flying in all directions. The sonorous ringing of the wooden fish echoed in all directions, shaking the ears of Wu Qi and the others a few miles away. The closer they got to the monk, the harsher the ringing of the wooden fish became. When they were only about 1 mile away from him, the ringing had turned into a deafening thunderclap, causing all the soldiers on the flying ship, including Huang Liang, to lose their balance. Smilingly, the monk looked at Wu Qi and the others, who were charging toward him menacingly. Slowly, he struck the wooden fish and recited, "The sea of bitterness has no bounds, repent and you will be saved." Every time he spat out a word, a golden lotus flower that was wrapped in a dense scarlet flame would spit out from the monk's mouth. This was the so-called golden lotus flower in one's mouth. There were 8 fist-sized characters floating within the stamen of the golden lotus, and they were constantly emanating dazzling golden light. The golden light wasn't dazzling, but the closer it got to the monk, the sharper the golden light became. It was like a sharp knife that cut into people's bodies. Wu Qi flew into a rage and said, "Where did this baldy come from to spout nonsense here? Get out of the East Sea County." The East Sea County was where Wu Qi started his business. Wu Qi was like a wild beast with a strong sense of territory. Whoever dared to invade his territory, he would definitely fight back with all his strength. On top of that, Wu Qi knew very well how frightening a religion could be, especially when it was a religion created by a Buddhist cultivator with a truly formidable power. Once their hands reached into the East Sea County, would the people, army, and officials of the East Sea County listen to these monks, or Wu Qi? He would never allow any Buddhist disciple to develop in the East Sea County. If one came, he would kill one, and if a pair came, he would kill a pair. This was the condition agreed upon by Wu Qi and Madman Shui. Seeing that the monk was openly using a Buddhist technique to recruit believers here, Wu Qi wished he could smash his head with a punch. How could he show him a nice face? How could he deal with him with nice words? Wu Qi was furious to the extreme. Madman Shui was the missionary disciple of Little Rui, delightful Buddha of Wishful Heaven realm. He should be able to control these monks who were recruiting believers everywhere. So, why did a monk suddenly come to the East Sea County to make trouble? Looking at Wu Qi, the monk suddenly grinned and said with a gentle voice, "I suppose Your Excellency is the chief officer of this territory. Why don't Your Excellency join the Buddhist League and get rid of the pain of transmigration? Wouldn't that be a happy thing?" Before Wu Qi could say anything, the monk said with a big smile, "The Buddhist League is vast, and all 3,000 great Taoists can be attained. If you want mountains of gold and oceans of silver, we have them. If you want beautiful women, we have them. If you want the power to kill, we have them. If you want a romantic life, we have them. In short, as long as you join the Buddhist League, you can have everything you want. Why don't Your Excellency and the army behind you convert to Buddhism?" Wu Qi snorted coldly. He raised his right hand and shouted, "Crossbows." 12 flying ships surrounded the monk in a semicircle, with countless crossbows aimed at him. The soldiers attached bone bolts, which were specially made to deal with powerful cultivators, to the crossbows. The dozens of oracles hurriedly crushed bone talismans, casting all kinds of defensive spells on the soldiers. Fearing that the power of these crossbows was not enough, Wu Qi recited a few incantations under his breath, then bit the tip of his finger and flicked it. A stream of blood shot out, transforming into thousands of tiny talismans and attached themselves to the arrowheads of the crossbow bolts. Shrill ghost howls rang out as these talismans immediately transformed into dark smoke and firmly imprinted themselves on the arrowheads. The once dull bone arrowheads twisted like melted candles, and even had a faint trace of a single-horned ghost head on them. The monk gave Wu Qi a look of astonishment, then ran his eyes over Wu Qi's tall and straight body like lightning bolts. "How did you learn the art of talismans? Judging from your body shape, I suppose you are practicing a cultivation technique that uses brute force?" Right after the monk's cry of astonishment rang out, thousands of arrows were shot out from all directions along with the jarring creaking of bowstrings, enveloping the monk's body in a whistling rain of arrows. The density of the arrows was too great. As they flew at high speed, they created turbulent air vortexes and produced shrill and long whistling noises that sounded like ghost howls. Laughing foolishly, the 9 scars on the monk's forehead emitted a large sheet of golden Buddhist light, which condensed into countless fist-sized muni pearls that flew all over the sky. Amidst a series of crackling noises, thousands of arrows were twisted and broken by the pearls, then exploded and sprayed out large plumes of dark smoke and evil aura. There were even large flashes of flame, thunderbolts, and water vapor that towered into the sky, while all kinds of energies kept bursting out from the arrows. The Buddha saves the predestined one. The monk looked at Wu Qi with a serious expression, smiled, and said, "But too bad, Your Excellency, you are not the predestined one. The people behind you are my predestined ones." With a flip of his palm, 2 golden lotuses shot out from it. Laughing strangely, the monk thrust the lotuses toward Wu Qi and unleashed a tremendous suction force, wrapping Wu Qi up with 2 beams of golden light, pulling both him and Ao Buzan, who was clinging on his collar. The golden lotuses closed inwardly, transforming into a sheet of golden light that hovered before the monk. The fat monk laughed foolishly, then turned to Huang Liang and his companions, who were dumbfounded, and said, "Benefactors, you are my predestined ones. Come, let me tell you about the magical art of Buddhism, and enlighten you with the wisdom of your previous lives." Laughing complacently, the monk shook his head and said, "Dear benefactors, please remember, I am Ming Li, the missionary disciple of Prabhuparatna Buddha in the Great Freedom and Happiness Heavenly Realm. Benefactors, once you join the Buddhist League, you will have everything you ask for, and you will have no worries for the rest of your lives." Trembling, Huang Liang looked at the monk, mustered up his courage, raised his right hand, and said, "Formation. Dark Shell 8-Direction Motionless Formation." The Dark Shell 8-Direction Motionless Formation was a defensive formation commonly used by human warriors, and could only be activated with the help of large weapons. Following Huang Liang's order, the 12 flying ships gathered inwardly, with the 4 ships in the middle moving in the direction of the 4 symbols, and the 8 ships on the outside moving in the direction of the 8 trigrams. The decks on both sides of the ships were slowly lifted up, and countless bronze chains darted out from the decks, intertwining and weaving into a large and thick net. A deep buzzing noise could be heard coming from the ships, while a dim green light shone from the bronze chains, growing stronger and stronger until it completely enveloped the 12 ships. The only oracles from East Sea County flew up into the sky and cast out a large number of bone talismans according to their positions, controlling the changes of the Dark Shell 8-Direction Motionless Formation. As these oracles incanted a spell in a deep voice, the green light gradually condensed into a large and thick turtle shell, on which the patterns of the 8 trigrams could be clearly seen. Clear runes could be seen all over the turtle shell, and each rune vaguely formed the shape of a lofty mountain. Interesting. Interesting. Dear benefactors, your destiny is still lacking a little bit of maturity. Monk Ming Li laughed. He rolled up his sleeves and said carelessly, "Then, let this poor monk add a little more fuel to the fire and let all of you know what fate is." With the huge wooden fish in his left hand and the thick wooden fish hammer in his right, Ming Li trod on a white cloud and flew slowly to the side of the Dark Shell 8-Direction Motionless Formation. With the corners of his mouth drooping down, he smiled at Huang Liang, who was standing on the prow of the ship and commanding the ship. Then, he raised the wooden fish forged from pure gold and sent a large sheet of golden Buddhist light into the air. Like a golden shooting star, it smashed viciously onto the green turtle shell. With just one strike, a large sheet of auspicious light spread in all directions, and the formation formed by the 12 ships was knocked tens of miles away by Ming Li. The soldiers on the ships lost their balance and fell to the deck one after another. The dozens of oracles controlling the formation gave a muffled snort as blood oozed out from their 7 apertures. Their palms, which had formed into finger seals, bounced off as if they were struck by thunderbolts. Electric arcs burst out from their fingertips and burned them to a crisp. "Counterattack! Counterattack!" cried Huang Liang at the top of his voice. Following Huang Liang's roar, the soldiers rose to their feet, controlled the ships, and launched a storm-like attack at Ming Li. Streams of light, countless arrows, and a large number of javelins flew towards Ming Li. While the outside was in a great mess, Wu Qi, who was sucked into the golden lotus, found himself in a magical place. There was no sun or moon in the sky, but a bright light shone brightly, as bright as day. Amidst the auspicious clouds, as far as the eye could see, there was a large expanse of clear water. The water was as sticky as butter, and was emitting a faint fragrance. White lotus flowers were blooming in the clear water. As a breeze blew across, the lotus flowers danced gently, and a faint aroma came wafting out. Not far away, a lofty mountain stood towering amidst the boundless clear water. The mountain was about 1,000 miles tall, and about 100,000 miles in circumference. It looked majestic, like a crouching tiger lying between the heaven and the earth. Countless monasteries of various sizes could be seen on the mountain. These monasteries were all built with golden bricks, emitting a faint golden glow and purple mist under the bright sunlight. 108 streams of white mist were seen flying across the sky above the lofty mountain, and faint chanting of Buddhist scriptures could be heard coming from the countless monasteries. On the spacious stone steps in the mountain, large groups of monks and nuns were walking slowly with incense sticks and candles in their hands, chanting the name of Prabhudaratna, Buddha of great mercy and great compassion illuminates the universe. Every time they chanted the name of Buddha, a large amount of power of faith, invisible to the naked eye, would soar up into the sky and drill into the 108 streams of white mist. Ao Buzan raised his head from Wuqi's collar and cursed under his breath. This is going to be fun. These are the interstitial spaces crafted by the experts among those bald donkeys, the so-called Buddhist kingdom in a palm. One world in a grain of sand, 3,000 Buddhas in one world, and the Buddhist kingdom in a palm was the most mysterious and powerful divine ability of the Buddhist League. Those who could cultivate the Buddhist kingdom in a palm were existences at least at the level of Golden Bodhisattva. Chapter 668. Just like the interstitial worlds of immortals, the Buddhist League also had a Buddhist kingdom in a palm. At this moment, the small world where Wuqi and Ao Buzan were located was a Buddhist kingdom in a palm. Smoke was lingering in the air, a cool breeze was blowing, and the light of relics was shining in all directions. The majesty of the Buddhist League was naturally contained in every inch of the void. The lofty mountain in front of him was like a living prehistoric beast. The pressure emanating from it made Wuqi frown, and all his bones and tendons were creaking noisily because of the pressure emanating from it. The Buddhist kingdom in a palm was different from the interstitial worlds of immortals. Heaven immortals with great luck and profound heritage could also refine their own interstitial worlds by chance. However, the Buddhist kingdom in a palm of a Buddhist cultivator was completely formed by the power of faith of his believers. Every blade of grass, every tree, every drop of water, and every stone was formed by pure power of faith. Without enough powerful Buddhist power and faith provided by enough believers, a Buddhist cultivator could never form his own Buddhist kingdom. Generally speaking, only a bodhisattva with the strength equivalent to a gold immortal, and a golden bodhisattva with an extremely profound cultivation base, could form a Buddhist kingdom. But when he saw Mingli outside, his cultivation base was at most a top-grade golden bodhisattva, and he was still a long way from the realm of bodhisattva. How could he form such a Buddhist kingdom? Standing on a lotus flower and looking at the mountain in front of him, Wuqi could see at least 10 million believers walking around the mountain, chanting the name of Buddha. With Ming Li's cultivation base, how could he gather so many devout believers? 10 million believers, not including those who were currently cultivating in the monastery, was a terrifying number. Only the most devout believers could be brought into the Buddhist kingdom at any time. Generally speaking, it would be very good if 1 out of 10,000 believers could meet the requirements, and only 1 out of 100 could be brought into the Buddhist kingdom. To gather more than 10 million devout believers here, it would take a very long time for the Buddhist kingdom to accumulate such a huge number of believers. Shaking his head, Wuqi murmured to himself in puzzlement. Ao Buzan's eyes were shining. He looked greedily at the countless believers walking slowly on the mountain and whispered to Wuqi about the benefits of these believers. These believers were actually people who had died. After their corporeal bodies perished, their souls were received by the owner of the Buddhist nation and arrived here. Their corporeal bodies were reformed by the Buddhist divine arts. These fleshly bodies were the amalgamation of pure energy and souls. Especially because they chanted scriptures all year round, their souls were especially nourished and strengthened. If they were believers who had lived in the Buddhist kingdom for more than 1,000 years, their soul power would be at least 100 times stronger than that of ordinary people. When Ao Buzan was still a lascivious dragon who went around flirting with innocent girls, there were already daring immortals of the fiendish Tao who specifically attacked the Buddhist kingdom of the Bodhisattvas of the Buddhist League. Once they breached the Buddhist kingdom, they would use the fastest speed to abduct all the believers. These believers had extremely powerful souls, and they could be used to refine all kinds of fiendish Tao magical artifacts, which were countless times more powerful than those refined from the souls of ordinary people. After listening to Ao Buzan's introduction, Wu Qi looked thoughtfully at Ao Buzan. Ao Buzan squinted his eyes and let out a strange laugh, spreading his two front paws to the left and right. He whispered to Wu Qi that these believers in the Buddhist kingdom had many uses. Even if Wu Qi had no use for them, he could still capture them and trade them. In Ao Buzan's memory, there were several secret trading markets opened by immortals of the fiendish Tao. Believers in the Buddhist kingdom were highly sought after in these markets. With 10,000 believers as a unit, each unit was worth tens of thousands of yuan, enough to make an immortal rich overnight. And here, there were at least 10 million believers of the Buddhist kingdom, who had lived for a long time, but did not have much fighting power. Wu Qi's heart raced. His eyes glowed as he looked at the great mountain in front of him. Suddenly, he laughed coldly and said, "This monk must have lost his mind. Since he sent me here, he can't blame me for being rude, can he?" Laughing wildly, Wu Qi had also thought of the use of these believers. Even if he could not trade them, they could be used as sacrificial offerings. Originally, Wu Qi had nothing to do with these believers, but since Mingli had blatantly invaded Wu Qi's territory and captured Wu Qi with the mystic technique of the Buddhist kingdom in the palm, they could not blame Wu Qi for being so cruel to them. He opened his mouth and inhaled. A large sheet of chaotic light sprayed out, and the believers who were walking slowly around the great mountain cried out in alarm at the same time. Their bodies floated up into the air and flew toward Wu Qi's mouth along the chaotic light. Suddenly, a sonorous Buddhist mantra was heard coming from the largest temple on the top of the mountain. "The sea of bitterness has no bounds, repent and you will be saved." Together with a vigorous Buddhist power, the mantra condensed into a thunderbolt in the void and smashed into Wu Qi's spiritual ocean, trying to knock him out. However, Wu Qi's spiritual ocean was vast and empty, and his innate chaotic divine soul was hidden in it, protected by the divine flame of order. As a result, the mantra was like a stone thrown into the ocean, disappearing without leaving any ripples. Wu Qi snorted coldly, then performed a hand incantation gesture and cast it toward the temple. After that, he chanted a thunder spell under his breath, getting ready to strike down a thunderbolt and raze the temple to the ground. However, right after the incantation gesture were cast, Wu Qi cried out in surprise. The incantation gesture he cast out did not work at all. He did not even sense a ripple of energy, and there was no thunderbolt as he expected. Ao Buzan breathed out a long sigh, then began to explain to Wu Qi about the magical Buddhist kingdom in a palm. According to the cultivation technique they cultivated, the interstitial world of an immortal would have all kinds of extreme properties, such as an ocean of lava, a world of ice and snow, clouds and mists, thunderbolts, boundless hurricanes, and so on. However, the Buddhist kingdoms of Buddhist cultivators were all the same. Their Buddhist kingdoms didn't have any other power. What filled the Buddhist kingdoms was the pure Buddhist power cultivated by the Buddhist cultivators. How could an immortal cultivate the cultivation technique of Buddhist League? Therefore, after an immortal was imprisoned in a Buddhist kingdom, it would not take long for him to exhaust all his immortal energy, and he would become the prey of others. For example, when Wu Qi was chanting an incantation gesture and trying to unleash a thunderbolt to attack someone, there was no natural energy for him to use in this place. Unless he consumed his own energy, he would not be able to unleash even a single spark. Wu Qi was suddenly enlightened, and he exclaimed in admiration. This Buddhist kingdom was indeed an interesting place. The era where Wu Qi inherited the scroll of stealing began in the primordial era, and lasted for several tens of eons before coming to an abrupt end. The records about Buddhist League in the scroll of stealing were only limited to the era when the ancient Buddhas existed. Therefore, Wuqi was able to recognize the remains of the ancient Buddhas used by Patriarch Miaoing to suppress the formation in the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. However, when it came to the various techniques used by the Buddhist League cultivators, he did not have a clear understanding of them. It was only after listening to Ao Buzan's explanation that Wuqi truly understood the magical features of the Buddhist kingdom in a palm. With a cold snort, Wuqi waved his hand and was about to unleash the chaotic energy in his body into heavenly thunderbolts to attack the enemies. But suddenly, countless figures dashed out from the countless monasteries on the mountain. Among the group of people who were charging toward Wuqi on clouds, 300 burly men who stood several tens of feet tall and clad in golden armors, each with a golden dragon head on their head. Behind these 300 dragon-headed men were more than 1,000,000 mighty monks dressed in kasayas of various colors and holding white jade staffs in their hands. These monks lined up in a neat phalanx of 10,000 people, shouting the name of Prabhudaratna Buddha at the top of their lungs as they charged toward Wuqi with a ferocious gleam in their eyes. With just a glance, Wuqi could tell that the cultivation base of the 300 dragon-headed men were merely at the level of 30th tier heaven immortal. But, after being enhanced by some unknown force in the Buddhist kingdom, the aura emanating from their bodies was actually close to that of a 5th-tier heaven immortal. Among the 1,000,000 monks, many of them had the cultivation base equivalent to the nascent soul realm of immortal cultivators. But, after being enhanced by that magical force, the aura emanating from them was no different from that of heaven immortals. Their bodies were shrouded in Buddhist light, making them look like arhats forged from pure gold. Roaring and yelling, they charged straight toward Wuqi. In other words, there were 300 upper-tier heaven immortals and over 1,000,000 heaven immortals here. The faces of Wuqi and Ao Buzan turned blue. Although they were bold, and Ao Buzan still had the cultivation base of a gold immortal, Ao Buzan, who had just stepped into the gold immortal realm, would never have the courage to fight against over 1,000,000 heaven immortals. Even if they just stood there and let Ao Buzan kill them, his hands would go limp. And, even if they just let Ao Buzan devour them without putting up any resistance, Ao Buzan's stomach would burst because of the 1,000,000 monks. Hastily, Wuqi exercised his chaotic divine eyes and looked at the dragon-headed men and the monks. From every temple on the mountain, a magnificent golden beam of light shot up into the sky, piercing into the heads of these people. Golden halos rippled around these people, forming a set of translucent golden armor that only Wuqi could see with his chaotic divine eyes. These armors were about 1 inch thick, and inlaid with countless golden swastikas and golden lotus flowers. Each lotus flower had a Buddha standing on it, and all the Buddhas had their hands locked together before their chests. From between their brows, beams of white light shot out, shielding the bodies of these dragon-headed men and monks. It was this armor that had attracted the power of some powerful existences, giving them an overall strength far beyond their own realm. Looking coldly at these people, Wuqi pointed at them and snorted coldly, "These people look similar to Wanying Dragon King and the others. Don't tell me they are also the men of dragons?" Ao Buzan cried out in astonishment. Suddenly, 2 beams of bright light shot out from his eyes as he turned to look at those dragon-headed men. After that, Ao Buzan suddenly broke into a torrent of curses. From some elders of dragons to some clan leaders of some branches of dragons, Ao Buzan greeted their entire families with all kinds of filthy words, and especially passionately expressed his ardent hope of developing some purely physical relationship with their daughters and granddaughters. They are the men of dragons, but they have abandoned the dragon transformation script and other divine abilities of dragons. What they are cultivating are the divine abilities of Buddhism League. Ao Buzan trembled with anger. Scums who don't even care about their ancestors are actually cultivating the divine abilities of Buddhism League. While he was speaking, 300 dragon-headed men had arrived before Wuqi. The leading man raised up a Vajra scepter and smashed it down towards Wuqi's head. "All evil and heretical cultivators shall bow and convert to the land of Buddha." 300 dragon-headed men roared furiously at the same time. Instinctively, Wuqi punched out and greeted the scepter. Even with the power of Buddhism, the aura of these dragon-headed men was only at the level of 5th-tier heaven immortal. Therefore, Wuqi did not take them seriously. A loud boom rang out. Wuqi snorted lightly and retreated hastily. The aura emanated from the dragon-headed man was only at the level of 5th-tier heaven immortal, but the strength of his scepter was incredibly strong. Wu Qi felt as if 10,000 mountains were falling from the sky. His wrist bones were broken, and even his shoulder was dislocated. Wu Qi was pushed back by the force, but the dragon-headed men had already leaped forward, each wielding a Vajra scepter and smashing it down toward his face. Chapter 669. Wu Qi cursed when his wrist was broken. With a twist of his wrist, a stream of purple mist sprayed out of his muscles and quickly repaired the broken bone. On top of that, he was surprised to find that after the broken bones were healed, the texture of the bones around the wounds had become denser, and there was even a faint purple gleam shimmering from them. Wu Qi nodded thoughtfully. While he was distracted, the 3 Vajra scepters had already struck his left shoulder, back, and waist. The sound of bones breaking rang out like beans being fried, and Wu Qi howled in pain. His fleshly body was extremely strong now, and his bones were thousands of times harder than steel. And because his bones were so strong, the pain when they were broken was even greater. Even Wu Qi could not bear the excruciating pain. The pain made his vision go black, and he nearly fainted. Fortunately, his divine soul was extremely strong now. After absorbing the soul power of over 100 million evil spirits, and 1/3 of the souls of the living beings on myriad immortals' planet, his divine soul was now even stronger than the immortal soul of some gold immortals. Thanks to his strong divine soul, Wu Qi would not faint no matter what kind of pain he was enduring. Therefore, he had to bear the excruciating pain with all his might. Beads of sweat kept pouring out from his body, while a large amount of purple mist kept bursting out from his muscles, bone marrow, and blood, quickly healing the broken bones. The newly healed bones were at least 30% stronger than the bones that were just broken. In just the space of a breath, when Wu Qi had just finished repairing the broken bones, a dozen Vajra scepters came whistling down with deep, muffled whistling noises. Strengthened by the Buddhist energy, these dragon-headed men, whose cultivation bases were far weaker than Wu Qi's, were able to exert a terrifying strength that was comparable to that of a gold immortal. All the Buddhist energy in the entire Buddhist kingdom was surging violently, echoing with these dragon-headed men. The immense power of faith of over 10 million devout believers turned into an invincible torrent and poured into the bodies of these dragon-headed men, turning them into angry Vajras of the Buddhist League and giving them a series of violent beatings. Ao Buzan's mouth was twitching with anger. When he heard the sound of bones breaking coming from Wu Qi's body, Ao Buzan was about to reveal his true form and teach these dragon-headed men a lesson. In Ao Buzan's opinion, abandoning the secret cultivation technique of the Dragon Clan and cultivating the divine ability of the Buddhist League was an act of betraying one's own master and ancestors, an act of treason and unfilial. The dragons of the dragon race could eat, drink, and gamble. They could kill and set fires. They could plunder the world. They could go to the graves of their ancestors and dig up their ancestors' corpses and primordial spirits. They could let them shine like the setting sun and let them contribute to the prosperity and strength of the dragon race with their last bit of energy. But instead of cultivating the martial arts of the dragons, they chose to cultivate the divine ability of the bald donkeys of the Buddhist League. These dragon-headed men had given up their identity as the dragons. This was something that Ao Buzan could never tolerate. He wanted to teach them a lesson. No, he wanted to kill all these dragon-headed men, then kill all the bald donkeys who controlled them from behind, and turn all their female relatives into his bed companions. A dense black light burst out of Ao Buzan's body. Ao Buzan was about to lash out in anger, but Wu Qi pressed down on Ao Buzan's body and told him not to move. Dozens of Vajra pestles struck Wu Qi's body, breaking more than a dozen of his bones, and shattering them in several places. But, under the constant nourishment of the purple mist, his broken bones were reconnected, and shattered bones were reformed. The new bones were a few times stronger than the original ones, and the speed of cultivation was at least dozens of times faster than if he cultivated on his own. Wu Qi had reached the bottleneck, and it would take him a great deal of effort to make any progress. Now that he had such a convenient way to improve his strength, how could he let Ao Buzan mess things up? Enduring the pain, Wu Qi spread his arms and cursed Prabhudaratna Buddha. From Prabhudaratna Buddha's mother and father, to his grandchildren, to his master's wife, Wuchi cursed all of them with the most vicious language. His words were vicious and obscene. These dragon-headed men, who had been guarding the Buddhist kingdom for thousands or even tens of thousands of years, exploded like a bomb. Ignoring the question of whether Prabhudaratna Buddha had a wife or not, 300 dragon-headed men surrounded Wuchi, raised their pestles, and began to beat him violently. These dragon-headed men were infuriated. They did not say any empty words such as the sea of bitterness is boundless, repent and be saved, nor did they say any slogans such as the Buddha is destined to save the world. Instead, they just surrounded Wuchi and beat him. Wuchi's finger bones, wrist bones, arm bones, shoulder blades, ribs, neck bones, spine bones, skull bones, pelvis bones, thigh bones, knee bones, calf bones, ankle bones, soles bones, and toes bones were all crushed. But, a large amount of purple mist was rushing out of his muscles, blood, bone marrow, and meridians. With the nourishment of the purple mist, it only took the time of a single breath for his bones to be repaired, and the hardness and flexibility of his bones had been greatly improved. At first, when the scepter struck Wuchi, it produced a series of clanking noises like steel smashing tofu, followed by a series of clanking noises like steel smashing a tree trunk, and then a series of clanking noises like steel smashing a rock. 2 hours later, when the scepter struck Wuchi, a series of clanking noises could be heard. At first, when these dragon-headed men hit Wuchi with all their strength, Wuchi would be knocked hundreds of feet away, and then he would be smashed away by another pestle. But, as the sound of bones breaking changed, the distance Wuchi could fly after each hit became shorter and shorter. By the time his bones collided with the scepter and produced a deafening clang of metal, he was able to stand firmly in a lotus flower, spreading his arms and legs to allow the dragon-headed men to attack him at will. Wuchi stood there like a mountain. 300 pestles smashed on his body with dazzling golden beams, but they could only make his body sway and not fly away like before. Every strike could still cause countless cracks to appear on his bones, but they could no longer break his bones, nor could they shatter his bones. 1,000,000 monks stood in a circle in a distance, staring at Wuchi in terror, wondering where this monster came from. He was so tough that he could withstand the crazy attacks from the 308 groups of dragons guarding this Buddhist kingdom. Time ticked by, and soon, another 4 hours had passed. The 300 dragon-headed men were panting and sweating profusely. They finally realized that something was wrong. Every time they struck, Wuchi's body did not move at all. Instead, their palms were aching and swollen. Sparks flew in all directions from the pestles, and with each strike, the pestles bounced high up into the air. But, Wuchi's body just swayed gently, and the sound of bones breaking could no longer be heard. The tallest dragon-headed man threw his head back and let out a furious dragon roar. The fiend flame rises high, and the power of the Buddha is boundless. Prabhudaratna Buddha, please send down the boundless power of the Buddha to subdue the demon and slay the fiend. Buddha is merciful, and will purge you, evildoer. As the dragon-headed man gave a long cry, the 1,000,000 monks sat cross-legged in midair, threw away their white jade staffs, put their palms together, and began chanting the Buddhist scriptures while Chi-Chi put his palms together. One after another, a large number of monks clad in kasayas flew up from countless temples on the mountain. Suddenly, tens of thousands of caves opened up on the mountain, from which walked out countless devout believers clad in monk robes. More than 30 million believers were chanting the Buddhist scriptures at the same time, and a tremendous amount of power of faith towered into the sky. 90% of the power of faith was absorbed by the 108 white beams in the sky, while the remaining 10% shot down from the sky and injected into the bodies of the 300 dragon-headed men. Their tens of feet tall bodies gradually shrunk, and their skin turned golden and shiny as if they were cast from pure gold. When their bodies shrunk to the same height as an ordinary human being, they wielded their pestles, which were also much smaller, but shone even more dazzlingly, and were now covered with a layer of pale golden flame, and thrust them towards Wuchi. The 300 men were divided into more than 30 teams, circling around Wuchi like a windmill. One after another, they spun around Wuchi's body and smashed their pestles towards Wuchi's body. The noise that sounded like steel hitting wood echoed out once again. Once again, Wuqi's bones, muscles, and tendons were shattered inch by the pestles. An even more intense pain came from Wuqi's body. Wuqi roared furiously and stood where he was, not moving an inch. The enormous chaotic energy in his body was spinning rapidly, quickly assimilating with the purple mist that spurted out from his muscles. Every 10 portions of chaotic energy could be assimilated into 1 portion of purple mist. Dense purple mist filled his entire body. Wuqi chuckled, opened his mouth, and began to devour the Buddhist power around him. Not only the Buddhist power, Wuqi was even fighting with these dragon-headed men for the power of faith that poured down from the sky. The 7 Foundation elevating technique specialized in cultivating chaotic energy. With its special characteristics, any kind of power, any kind of physical existence, could be absorbed by chaotic energy. A small interstitial world had formed inside Wuqi's body. Therefore, his ability to absorb and plunder natural energy was at least 10,000 times stronger than these dragon-headed men. Under Wuqi's efforts, with Wuqi as the core, the Buddhist power and the power of faith in the Buddhist kingdom gradually transformed into a giant golden whirlpool, quickly injecting into Wuqi's body. Catalyzed by the small interstitial world, the pure chaotic energy flowed through Wuqi's body, then quickly assimilated into purple mist, rushing towards the injured parts of Wuqi's body. Smashed, repaired, smashed again, repaired again. Wuqi howled in pain, but at the same time, he howled in pleasure. With the cooperation of these 300 conscientious dragon-headed men, Wuqi's physical strength had once again improved to a great extent. Using brute force to break the bottleneck, Wuqi's eyes gradually shone with a bright light that no one dared to look directly at. His overall strength was growing bit by bit, and a bright light shone in front of his eyes. Under the guidance of the 7 Foundation elevating technique, the Song of Gale, the Darkeen Water Scripture, the Inferno Hell Fiend Scripture, the True Body of Heaven and Earth Scripture, the Dragon Transformation Script, and the other cultivation techniques transformed into torrents and quickly flowed across Wuqi's mind. The bright light before his eyes expanded rapidly. Wuqi felt that his entire body was enveloped in an incredibly bright light. The strong light shone out from his body, through every pore on his body, and spread out in all directions. Large pieces of dead skin fell off from his skin, while large clouds of filthy black smoke rose from the top of his head. Amidst the putrid black smoke, there was a faint trace of a strange fragrance. Chuckling, Wuqi suddenly laughed out loud and said, "I am indeed destined to meet you Buddhists." Amidst his wild laughter, ink-black divine flame burst out of Wuqi's eyes and rose into the sky like 2 ferocious poisonous dragons. Within a blink of an eye, the flame had burned through the void and left a giant hole in the sky of this Buddhist kingdom, over 1,000 miles in diameter. A faint light shone in from the outside, as Wuqi, who had made a great improvement in his cultivation base, burned through the space barrier of this Buddhist kingdom. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.